Welcome, fellow dreamer. Tonight, we journey through the quiet revolution that changed the way we eat, sleep, and live. Long before electric hum filled our kitchens, merchants shipped ice from frozen New England ponds all the way to India, 16,000 miles across the equator, and enough survived to sell. This tale unfolds against a backdrop of soothing music and abstract imagery, gently revealing the hidden wonders and unlikely stories behind humanity's long quest to hold back decay, one innovation at a time. So take a deep breath, settle into your pillow, and let your thoughts soften as we explore together. Allow your eyes to rest, your mind to wander, and the story to carry you peacefully towards sleep. In the beginning, long before the hum of refrigerators became the background music of our kitchens, humanity faced a fundamental challenge that occupied the minds of every culture, in every corner of the world. Food, the very substance of life, would not wait patiently for us. The meat from a successful hunt would begin to spoil within days. Milk, fresh from the morning, would sour by evening. Fruits at the peak of ripeness would rot before the week's end. The earth provided bounty, but that bounty came with a ticking clock, and our ancestors had to become ingenious if they hoped to survive the lean times between harvests and hunts. Imagine, if you will, a world without the simple act of opening a refrigerator door. No chilled beverages on a warm afternoon, no leftovers wrapped and waiting for tomorrow's meal, no frozen reserves to draw upon when fresh provisions ran low. For the vast sweep of human history, this was not imagination, but reality, and our forebears developed a remarkable array of methods to outwit the natural decay that claimed their food supplies. The earliest humans were nomadic, following the migrations of animals and the ripening of wild plants through the seasons. They ate what they could find, when they could find it, and moved on. But as communities began to settle, as agriculture took root and civilizations emerged, the problem of preservation became urgent. A farming village that could not store grain through winter faced starvation. A coastal settlement that could not preserve its catch would waste the ocean's gifts. The challenge was not merely one of convenience, but of survival itself. Across the ancient world, different cultures discovered that the sun could be an ally in preservation. In the hot, arid regions of the Middle East and North Africa, people learned to cut meat into thin strips and lay them on rocks beneath the relentless sun. The heat drew moisture from the flesh, and without water, the bacteria that caused decay could not thrive. These dried strips, tough and concentrated, could last for months, providing protein long after the animal had been slaughtered. Fish, too, could be split and sun-dried on racks, transforming the perishable into the permanent. In the Americas, indigenous peoples developed sophisticated drying techniques suited to their environments. In the high altitudes of the Andes, communities created charqui, the ancestor of modern jerky, using the intense mountain sun and cold nights to freeze-dry meat naturally. The thin air and temperature swings did the work that machinery would later accomplish. In coastal regions, fish and shellfish were dried on frames, creating stores of food that could sustain communities through seasons when the sea grew too rough for fishing. But drying was only one tool in humanity's preservation toolkit. Salt, that precious mineral that civilizations fought wars to control, proved to be a powerful preservative. The ancient Egyptians understood salt's properties well, using it not only to preserve their dead for the afterlife, but also to keep fish and meat edible in the intense heat of the Nile Valley. Salt draws moisture from food through osmosis, creating an environment hostile to the microorganisms that cause spoilage. Salted fish became a staple commodity in the ancient Mediterranean, traded across vast distances and feeding armies on the march. The Chinese developed intricate methods of salt preservation, creating traditions that persist to this day. Fish and vegetables submerged in brine could last for years, developing complex flavors that became prized in their own right. The process was so reliable that entire regional cuisines evolved around preserved ingredients, transforming necessity into culinary art. Smoke from fires did more than just cook food and warm shelters. Observant ancestors noticed that meat hung above the fire stayed fresh longer than meat stored away from the smoke. The compounds in wood smoke have antimicrobial properties, and the drying effect of hanging food near heat further discourages decay. Smokehouses became common features in communities across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, each culture developing its own techniques and preferences for wood types and smoking durations. The result was not just preserved food, but new flavors. Smoked fish, smoked meats, and smoked cheeses that defined regional identities. Perhaps the most mysterious of ancient preservation methods was fermentation, a process that transforms food through the action of beneficial bacteria and yeasts. Long before anyone understood microbiology, cultures worldwide discovered that certain foods, when prepared correctly and left to sit, would not spoil, but would instead change into something new and remarkably stable. Cabbage became sauerkraut or kimchi. Milk became yogurt or cheese. Grapes became wine. Soybeans became miso and soy sauce. These fermented foods did more than last. They became nutritional powerhouses, often more digestible and vitamin-rich than their original forms. The ancient Romans enjoyed garum, a fermented fish sauce that graced tables from Britain to Byzantium. Korean communities developed kimchi recipes passed down through generations, with each family guarding its particular methods. In every case, fermentation turned the problem of preservation into an opportunity for flavor and nutrition. Some preservation methods relied on creating physical barriers between food and the environment. Honey, used by ancient peoples from Egypt to China, could completely envelop foods in a substance too thick and too sweet for bacteria to penetrate. Archaeologists have found honey in Egyptian tombs that remained perfectly edible after thousands of years. Fats and oils served similar purposes. Meat cooked and then covered in its own rendered fat, a method called confit, could last for months in cool cellars. Underground storage offered another solution, particularly in temperate climates. Root cellars dug into the earth maintained relatively stable, cool temperatures year-round. Potatoes, turnips, carrots, and other root vegetables could be stored in sand or straw in these dim, cool spaces, lasting from one harvest season to the next. The earth itself became a kind of living refrigerator, its constant temperature slowing the processes of decay. In regions with distinct seasons, winter provided a temporary but powerful preservative. communities learned to time their slaughtering of livestock to coincide with the first hard freezes, knowing that frozen meat would keep until spring. But this was a gift limited by geography and season, unavailable to those in warm climates and useless once winter released its grip. These methods, drying, salting, smoking, fermenting, and cool storage, formed the foundation of food preservation for millennia. They were not merely practical solutions, but deeply embedded cultural practices, shaping cuisines, trade routes, and daily rhythms of life. Families planned their years around preservation schedules. Communities came together for harvest festivals that were also preservation marathons, turning bushels of produce into stores that would sustain them through barren months. Yet even with all this ingenuity, the dream of true cold storage, of stopping decay in its tracks rather than merely slowing it, remained just that, a dream. Fresh milk, crisp vegetables, tender meat as it was on the day of slaughter. These were luxuries limited by time and circumstance. The search for cold, for a way to capture winter's preserving power and hold it through all seasons, was about to begin. But first, humanity had to recognize that cold itself could be harvested, stored, and controlled. A realization that would dawn in the most unlikely of places. The first whispers of understanding came not from invention, but from the simple observation, in the quiet moments of early human experience, when people lived closer to the rhythms of nature than we can easily imagine today. Certain truths revealed themselves gradually, like dawn breaking over a mountain range. Picture a settlement nestled in the foothills of a great mountain, where winters brought deep snows and summers stretched warm and golden. The people there, like communities everywhere, faced the eternal challenge of keeping food from spoiling. But those who lived where cold was a natural part of the landscape began to notice something remarkable. Meat stored in a cave high in the mountains, where ice lingered even as spring flowers bloomed below, remained fresh far longer than meat kept in their dwellings. Fish left in the snow stayed firm and edible, while those kept at the hearth quickly became inedible. This observation was not the result of scientific inquiry as we understand it today. There were no controlled experiments, no written hypotheses. Instead, it emerged from the accumulated experience of generations, passed down through story and practice. A hunter might have noticed that game killed in winter and left in the snow could be retrieved days later, still good. A gatherer returning to a cache of food buried beneath snowpack might have discovered it preserved as if time had paused. In regions where winter brought reliable freezing temperatures, communities began to recognize patterns. Food kept cold lasted longer. The connection was undeniable, even if the reason remained mysterious. Cold, they observed, seemed to slow the invisible processes that made food decay. They could not have known about bacteria or understood the science of decomposition, but they could see the results with their own eyes and taste them with their own tongues. Some of the earliest evidence of deliberate ice storage comes from communities in mountainous regions of ancient China, where people harvested ice during winter months and stored it in pits dug deep into the earth. These storage pits were lined with materials that provided insulation, straw and reeds, carefully arranged to create barriers between the ice and the warmer air above. The ice, cut into manageable blocks, could remain frozen for months if the pit was well constructed and well maintained. The practice spread slowly, carried by traders and travelers who shared knowledge across vast distances. In the highlands of what we now call the Middle East, communities living in regions with cold winters and scorching summers began to develop their own methods. They noticed that caves on the shaded sides of mountains, particularly those at higher elevations, maintained cooler temperatures year-round. These natural refrigerators became valuable resources, places where food could be stored with confidence. The understanding grew more sophisticated with time. People learned that not all cold storage was equal. A shallow pit might keep food cool for a few days, while a deep cave maintained consistent temperatures for weeks. Ice packed tightly together melted more slowly than ice spread thin. Dense insulation worked better than sparse covering. Each generation refined the techniques, building on the discoveries of those who came before. In Northern Europe, where winters froze lakes and rivers solid, communities developed seasonal rhythms around ice. When the cold months arrived and water turned to ice thick enough to walk upon, people would venture out to harvest this natural resource. They cut blocks from frozen surfaces, transported them to storage facilities, and carefully preserved them against the inevitable warmth of spring and summer. The work was hard and cold, but the reward was the ability to keep food fresh when heat would otherwise spoil it within hours. These early ice harvesters could not have imagined the global industry their simple observations would eventually inspire. They were solving immediate problems, responding to the practical needs of daily life. Yet in doing so, they were establishing principles that would echo through millennia. They were learning that cold preserves, that insulation protects, that careful storage extends the useful life of precious food resources. The recognition that ice and snow could preserve food represented a crucial shift in human thinking. No longer were people entirely at the mercy of seasons and decay. With planning and effort, they could extend the bounty of productive times into leaner periods. A successful hunt need not be consumed immediately or preserved only through drying or salting. Ice offered another option, one that kept food closer to its fresh state. Different cultures adapted these principles to their unique environments. In Japan, mountain communities developed intricate systems for storing snow in specially constructed buildings that kept it frozen well into summer. In the Alps, villages positioned storage facilities in naturally cold locations, taking advantage of geography to maintain low temperatures. Across the northern reaches of Europe and Asia, wherever winter brought ice, people found ways to harness its preserving power. The knowledge was practical, passed from parent to child through demonstration and daily practice. There were no written manuals, no formal schools teaching refrigeration techniques. Instead, children learned by watching, by helping, by gradually taking on more responsibility in the essential work of food preservation. They learned which caves stayed coldest, how thick the insulation needed to be, when to harvest ice, and how to pack it efficiently. As communities grew and societies became more complex, the use of natural ice became more organized. What began as individual families storing food in cold caves evolved into communal ice houses, shared resources that benefited entire villages. The work of harvesting and storing ice became specialized, with certain families or groups taking responsibility for maintaining these crucial facilities. This growing sophistication set the stage for more elaborate systems. The simple observation that cold preserves food had been tested across countless winters, proven in diverse climates and cultures. The next step would be to build upon these foundations, to create structures and methods that could harness cold more reliably, more extensively, and in places where winter ice was not naturally available. The principle was established. Now, human ingenuity would work to expand its application, to bring the preserving power of cold to places and seasons where nature alone did not provide it. In the ancient lands where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carved their paths through sun-baked earth, ingenious minds conceived of structures that would stand as monuments to human determination in the face of nature's extremes. The people of Mesopotamia and Persia, living in climates where summer temperatures could soar to unbearable heights, refused to accept that ice and cooling were luxuries reserved only for those dwelling in naturally cold regions. Around 400 years before the Common Era, Persian engineers developed remarkable buildings called yakchals, a word meaning ice pit in their language. These weren't simple holes in the ground or modest storage sheds. They were architectural achievements that combined careful observation of natural phenomena with sophisticated construction techniques, creating spaces where winter ice could survive through the scorching months that followed. The design of a yakchal began with its foundation, dug deep into the earth where temperatures remain more stable throughout the year. Workers excavated large underground chambers, sometimes reaching depths of 30 feet or more. The excavation itself required careful planning, as the soil composition and water table depth all influenced how well the structure would eventually perform its cooling function. Above this subterranean storage space rose the yakchal's most distinctive feature, a domed roof that could tower 50 feet into the desert sky. These domes weren't built from ordinary materials. Persian builders developed a special mortar made from minute sand, clay, egg whites, lime, goat hair, and ash, mixed in specific proportions that had been refined through generations of experimentation. This mixture, called sarouj, possessed remarkable insulating properties and proved resistant to heat transfer. The dome's shape served multiple purposes beyond its aesthetic grandeur. Its conical form allowed hot air to rise and escape through vents at the top, creating natural air circulation within the structure. The thick walls, sometimes measuring 6 feet across at their base, provided substantial insulation that kept the fierce desert heat from penetrating to the ice stored below. The exterior was often coated in a light-colored finish that reflected sunlight rather than absorbing its warmth. But the yakchal represented just one part of a larger cooling system. Many of these ice houses incorporated wind catchers, tall towers with openings positioned to capture prevailing breezes. These architectural elements funneled cooler air down into the underground chambers, while allowing warm air to escape, creating a gentle but constant ventilation that helped maintain low temperatures, even when the sun blazed overhead. To the west of the yakchal, builders often constructed thick walls running north to south. These barriers, sometimes stretching hundreds of feet in length, cast long shadows over shallow pools or canals during the critical hours of late afternoon and early morning. The shadows prevented the sun from warming water meant to freeze during cold desert nights, when temperatures could plummet dramatically from their daytime peaks. The process of filling a yakchal began in winter, when teams of workers traveled into the nearby mountains where snow accumulated and ice formed. They carved blocks from frozen lakes and streams, or collected compacted snow, then transported these precious frozen resources back to the settlements on the plains. The journey required speed and careful planning, as even in winter, the cargo would begin to melt during the warmest parts of the day. Other yakchals relied on ice formed locally during the coldest months. The shallow pools near the ice houses would freeze on clear, cold nights. Before dawn, while darkness still held sway, workers would harvest the thin sheets of ice that had formed overnight. They stacked these layers in the yakchal's underground chamber, sometimes interspersing them with straw or other insulating materials to prevent the pieces from fusing into a single mass that would be difficult to extract later. As the underground chambers filled with ice, workers took care to arrange the blocks with small gaps between them, allowing air to circulate and preventing any warmth that did penetrate the structure from spreading quickly through the entire store. The topmost layers might be covered with sawdust, sand, or straw, adding another barrier against heat infiltration. Once stocked, a yakchal could preserve ice for months, even through the brutal summer season, when the desert surface became almost too hot to touch. The amount of ice that survived depended on many factors: the quality of the initial harvest, the thoroughness of the construction, the severity of the summer heat, and how frequently people opened the access passages to retrieve portions of the precious frozen resource. The ice stored in yakchals served multiple purposes in these ancient societies. Some was used to cool drinks and create frozen desserts, luxuries that demonstrated wealth and status. But the structures also supported more practical needs, allowing food to be kept fresh for longer periods and providing a means to create cooling for those suffering from illness or heat exhaustion during the most oppressive months. The technology spread across the Persian Empire and beyond, with variations appearing in different regions based on local climate conditions and available building materials. In some areas, yakchals were smaller and simpler. In others, they grew into vast complexes with multiple chambers and elaborate systems of channels and vents. Each adaptation reflected the builder's understanding of their specific environment and the particular challenges it presented. These structures represent a crucial moment in humanity's relationship with cold. They weren't merely storage facilities, but active systems that worked with natural phenomena rather than against them. The designers understood air circulation, heat reflection, insulation, and thermal mass long before these concepts would be formally described by science. They observed, experimented, and refined their techniques across generations, creating buildings that some modern engineers still marvel at for their effectiveness. Even today, archaeologists and historians discover new examples of these ancient ice houses, their domed forms still rising from the landscape despite centuries of abandonment. Some have been restored, offering tangible evidence of human ingenuity and our ancestors' refusal to accept the limitations their environment seemed to impose. In the yakchals of ancient Persia, we see not just buildings, but the embodiment of a fundamental human drive, the desire to shape the world around us, to create comfort and preserve sustenance, regardless of the challenges nature presents. The Romans possessed an appetite for luxury that extended to nearly every aspect of their daily lives, and the pleasure of chilled refreshments was no exception. While the Persians had mastered the art of storing ice in their remarkable yakchals, the Romans approached cooling with their own distinctive flair, creating elaborate systems that reflected both their engineering prowess and their love of comfort. In the warmth of the Mediterranean climate, ice and snow became symbols of status and sophistication. The wealthy citizens of Rome and other major cities developed a taste for beverages cooled with snow brought down from the distant mountains. On hot summer days, when the sun beat down on marble forums and terracotta roofs, nothing seemed quite as refreshing as wine or water, chilled to an almost shocking coldness. The process of bringing snow to Rome was itself a testament to Roman organizational skill. Teams of slaves and workers would venture into the Apennine Mountains, sometimes traveling for days to reach the higher elevations, where snow persisted even during warmer months. They collected the frozen precipitation with care, packing it tightly into containers and wrapping it in layers of insulating materials. Straw, sawdust, and even wool fabric served to slow the inevitable melting that occurred during the journey back to the city. The transportation of snow became a specialized trade. Caravans moved mostly at night, when cooler temperatures helped preserve their precious cargo. The workers learned through experience which paths offered the most shade, which valleys provided cooler passage, and how to maximize the amount of snow that survived the journey. Even with these precautions, a significant portion would melt during transport, making the snow that finally reached Rome all the more valuable and expensive. Once the snow arrived in the city, it needed to be stored carefully until use. The Romans constructed underground chambers specifically designed for this purpose, spaces they called putae nevarii, or snow wells. These storage facilities were engineering marvels in their own right. Dug deep into the earth, where temperatures remained more constant throughout the year, the walls were often lined with materials chosen for their insulating properties, and the chambers were positioned to take advantage of natural drainage, allowing meltwater to flow away rather than saturating the remaining snow. The design of these snow cellars reflected a sophisticated understanding of temperature management. By placing the storage chambers below ground level, the Romans benefited from the Earth's natural insulation. The deeper the chamber, the cooler and more stable the temperature remained. Some wealthy households constructed multiple chambers at different depths, finding through trial and observation which configurations preserved their snow most effectively. Entrance to these storage areas was carefully controlled. Small openings minimized the intrusion of warm air, and thick doors or covers helped maintain the cool environment within. When snow was needed, servants would descend quickly into the chamber, retrieve the required amount, and seal the space again as rapidly as possible. Every opening of the storage area represented a loss of cold and an acceleration of melting, so efficiency in these operations was essential. The uses for this stored snow extended beyond simple drink cooling. Romans discovered that surrounding containers of wine or other beverages with snow could bring them to delightful temperatures. They developed specialized vessels designed for this purpose. Cups and bowls constructed with double walls or compartments where snow could be packed around the inner chamber holding the liquid. These designs demonstrated a practical understanding of heat transfer, even if the underlying physics would not be formally explained for many centuries. Wealthy Romans also used snow in their food preparation. Ancient sources describe the practice of mixing snow directly into drinks or using it to chill fruits and other delicacies. Some evidence suggests that enterprising cooks experimented with freezing flavored liquids in snow, creating early predecessors to what we might recognize as frozen desserts. These treats remained luxuries available only to the most affluent members of society, their rarity adding to their appeal. The Emperor Nero was particularly famous for his love of chilled refreshments. Historical accounts describe his indulgence in drinks cooled with snow and ice, and he reportedly established relay stations along mountain routes to ensure a steady supply. Whether these stories capture literal truth or embellish the emperor's legendary extravagance, they illustrate how deeply the Roman elite associated cooling with luxury and pleasure. Beyond personal indulgence, the Romans also recognized practical applications for cooling. Physicians of the time sometimes recommended cold treatments for certain conditions, and snow or ice-cold water played roles in these therapeutic approaches. Markets selling fresh fish occasionally use snow to extend the time their products remained saleable, though this practice was less widespread than it would become in later centuries. The Roman approach to cooling differed fundamentally from the Persian model. While the yakchals represented permanent infrastructure designed to serve communities throughout the year, Roman snow storage was more individualistic and seasonal. Wealthy households maintained their own private snow cellars, and the supply of snow fluctuated with the seasons and weather patterns. A particularly warm spring in the mountains could mean shortages later in summer, while heavy winter snowfall promised abundance. This system also highlighted the economic disparities of Roman society. The cost of procuring and storing snow meant that only the wealthy could afford regular access to chilled foods and drinks. Common citizens might occasionally purchase small amounts of snow from vendors who sold it in the streets, but for most Romans, cooling remained an occasional luxury rather than a daily convenience. The knowledge required to maintain effective snow storage passed through generations of household managers and servants. They learned which types of snow packed most efficiently, how to layer straw and other insulating materials for maximum effect, and how to judge when stored snow was degrading too quickly to remain useful. This practical wisdom represented valuable expertise, and skilled managers of snow cellars were prized members of wealthy households. As the Roman Empire expanded, these cooling practices spread to other regions under Roman influence. Villas in southern Gaul, estates in Roman Britain, and households across the Mediterranean adopted similar systems where geography and climate permitted. Each region adapted the basic concepts to local conditions, finding nearby sources of snow or ice, and developing storage methods suited to their particular environments. The Roman embrace of cooling demonstrates how technological practices spread not just through practical necessity, but also through cultural values and social aspirations. The desire to enjoy chilled refreshments drove investment in infrastructure and trade networks, creating systems that, while less permanent than the Persian yakchals, nevertheless represented significant achievements in the ongoing human effort to control temperature and preserve the freshness of food and drink. As the Roman Empire flourished in the West, harvesting mountain snow to cool their wine and preserve delicacies, civilizations far to the east had already been developing their own sophisticated relationship with ice and cold for many centuries. In ancient China, the practice of collecting, storing, and using ice reached remarkable levels of refinement, woven deeply into the fabric of imperial life and seasonal rhythms. The Chinese recognized the preservative powers of ice as early as 1000 BCE, during the later years of the Shang dynasty, and continuing into the Zhou dynasty. Historical texts from this period make references to ice cellars and the official positions created to manage them. The Shi Jing, or Book of Songs, one of the oldest collections of Chinese poetry, contains verses celebrating the winter harvest of ice, describing how workers would venture to frozen rivers and lakes when the cold was at its deepest. The collection of ice in ancient China was not merely a practical task, but rather a ceremonial activity that marked the turning of seasons. When winter reached its coldest point, usually during the 12th lunar month, teams of workers would gather at designated collection sites. These locations were carefully chosen, often where rivers or lakes froze to sufficient thickness, and where the ice formed clear and pure. The workers would cut blocks from the frozen surface using specialized tools, creating geometric shapes that could be efficiently stacked and stored. The timing of this harvest held great significance in Chinese cosmology and agricultural calendars. The collection of ice symbolized the height of yin energy, the cold and dark forces that balance the yang warmth of summer. Ancient Chinese philosophy saw these opposing forces as fundamental to the natural order, and ice harvesting represented humanity's ability to capture and preserve this seasonal energy, holding on to winter's essence to use during summer's heat. Once harvested, these blocks of ice needed storage facilities capable of keeping them frozen through the warmer months. The Chinese developed structures called bingjian, or ice houses, which demonstrated remarkable engineering sophistication. These buildings were typically constructed partially or completely underground, taking advantage of the Earth's natural insulation properties. The walls were often double-layered, with the space between filled with materials that resisted heat transfer. Rice chaff, sawdust, and reeds became common insulating materials, chosen for their availability and effectiveness at trapping air and creating barriers against warmth. Some ice houses incorporated architectural features that promoted natural ventilation while preventing warm air from reaching the ice stores. The roofs were designed to reflect sunlight, and the entrances were positioned to minimize direct exposure to the sun's rays throughout the day. During the Zhou dynasty, which lasted from approximately 1046 to 256 BCE, the imperial court established formal bureaucratic positions dedicated to ice management. Officials called Ling Ren held responsibility for overseeing the entire ice operation, from harvest through storage and distribution. These positions were not minor administrative roles, but rather important governmental functions that required knowledge of construction, logistics, and seasonal patterns. Historical records indicate that some of these ice houses could store enormous quantities. The Zhou Li, or Rites of Zhou, An ancient Chinese text describing governmental organization mentions ice houses with capacities measured in the thousands of blocks. The text describes different grades of ice designated for various purposes, from the finest clear ice reserved for imperial use to lesser grades employed for more mundane preservation tasks. The imperial household used ice for multiple purposes throughout the warmer months. Palaces employed ice to cool residential chambers, providing relief from summer heat for the emperor and his court. Servants would place blocks of ice in bronze vessels designed to promote air circulation, creating an early form of air conditioning. The melting ice would cool the surrounding air, which would then flow through the rooms, offering respite from oppressive temperatures. Ice also played crucial roles in food preservation within the imperial kitchens. Perishable delicacies, including fresh fish, meat, and certain fruits, would be stored in proximity to ice blocks, extending their usability. The imperial physicians recognized that certain medicines and herbal preparations maintained their potency better when kept cool, so ice storage became integrated into the practice of traditional Chinese medicine. Beyond the palace walls, ice gradually became available to wealthy merchants and nobles who could afford to purchase it during summer months. A trade developed around this seasonal commodity, with ice merchants operating from the imperial stores or maintaining their own storage facilities. The price of ice fluctuated dramatically with the seasons, becoming increasingly expensive as summer progressed and supplies diminished. During the Tang dynasty, which flourished from 618 to 907 CE, the use of ice reached new heights of sophistication and cultural integration. Poets wrote verses celebrating the pleasure of ice-cooled drinks during summer festivals. Historical accounts describe elaborate frozen desserts enjoyed by the aristocracy, created by mixing fruit juices, honey, and milk with shaved ice or snow, producing treats that might be considered ancestors to modern ice cream or sorbet. The Song dynasty, spanning from 960 to 1279 CE, saw ice usage spread more widely through Chinese society. Cities developed ice distribution networks, and merchants sold ice from carts in urban marketplaces. Restaurants and tea houses began offering chilled beverages as attractions during hot weather. This broader availability transformed ice from an exclusively imperial commodity into something more accessible, though still a luxury that marked social status. Chinese innovations in ice transport also deserve attention. When ice needed to travel distances, specially designed containers provided insulation during the journey. These vessels, often made from wood or ceramic with thick walls and tight-fitting lids, were sometimes nested in larger containers, with insulating materials packed between the layers. This double vessel approach created effective portable ice storage for moving frozen goods across regions. The integration of ice into Chinese festival culture also flourished during these dynasties. The summer distribution of imperial ice to favored officials became an honored tradition, a gesture of imperial favor that recipients valued highly. Receiving ice from the emperor's stores represented recognition and status, carrying symbolic weight beyond its practical cooling properties. Throughout these many centuries, the Chinese approach to ice storage and use demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of thermal principles. Even without the scientific framework that would emerge much later in history, the empirical knowledge passed down through generations of icehouse builders harvesters, and users created a complex system that served multiple functions across Chinese society. As these practices continued evolving in the East, civilizations in other parts of the world were developing their own approaches to seasonal ice harvesting. The knowledge that winter's cold could be captured and preserved for use during summer's heat appeared independently across cultures, each developing techniques suited to their particular climates, resources, and needs. As the medieval period settled across Europe, the knowledge of ice harvesting and preservation that had developed in distant lands began to take root in a different form, shaped by the unique climate and circumstances of the continent. While the Chinese had refined their imperial ice systems, and other civilizations had developed their own sophisticated methods, Europeans would adapt these principles to their own frozen landscapes and social structures. The rhythm of medieval European life followed the seasons with an intensity difficult to imagine in our modern, climate-controlled world. Winter was not merely a time of cold, but a season of opportunity for those who understood that the ice forming on their lakes and rivers represented something valuable. In the depths of January and February, when temperatures plunged and bodies of water froze solid, communities across northern Europe ventured onto the frozen surfaces with saws, axes, and determination. The work of ice harvesting in medieval Europe was grueling yet methodical, passed down through generations as both practical knowledge and communal tradition. Teams of workers would gather at dawn when the ice was hardest and the winter sun cast long shadows across the frozen expanse. They learned to read the ice, testing its thickness with careful steps and knowing looks, understanding that safety depended on this frozen platform being at least 8 to 10 inches thick before the cutting could begin. The process started with marking. Using ropes and wooden stakes, workers would divide the frozen surface into a grid pattern, creating guidelines for cutting uniform blocks. This planning phase was crucial, as systematic harvesting was far more efficient than random cutting. The blocks needed to be manageable in size, typically measuring about 2 feet square, heavy enough to last but light enough for a strong person to handle with the right tools. Then came the cutting itself. Long ice saws with teeth specially designed to slice through frozen water would bite into the surface as workers moved in coordinated teams. The sound of sawing ice carries a particular quality, a rhythmic scraping that echoed across the winter landscape. It was careful work, requiring attention to prevent the saw from binding in the ice or cutting at the wrong angle. Each block had to be freed completely from the surrounding ice before it could be extracted. Once cut, the blocks needed to be removed from the water, a task that required both strength and ingenuity. Workers used long-handled hooks and tongs to grip the slippery ice, pulling each block up onto the surface where it could be loaded onto sleds or carts. Horses, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, would drag the loaded sleds across the frozen lake toward the shore, where the precious cargo would begin its journey to storage. The storage of ice in medieval Europe represented an evolution of ancient principles adapted to local materials and needs. Communities constructed ice houses, buildings specifically designed to preserve ice through the warmer months. These structures varied in sophistication, depending on the wealth and resources of those who built them, but they all shared common principles that made them effective. Many ice houses were partially or completely underground, taking advantage of the Earth's natural insulation. The soil surrounding these chambers helped maintain a constant cool temperature, protected from the warming influence of summer sun. Above ground, the buildings often had thick walls, sometimes several feet deep, packed with whatever insulating materials were available. Straw was commonly used, as were sawdust, peat, and other organic materials that trapped air and slowed heat transfer. The interior design of these ice houses reflected a sophisticated understanding of how to maintain cold. Proper drainage was essential, as melting ice would create water that, if left standing, would actually accelerate further melting. Channels and drains were built into the floors, allowing meltwater to flow away from the stored ice. Ventilation systems carefully positioned to avoid direct warming but allow air circulation helped manage humidity and prevent the formation of insulation-destroying condensation. Loading an ice house was as methodical as harvesting the ice itself. Blocks were stacked with care, often with insulating material packed between layers and around the entire mass. The goal was to create one large frozen block from many smaller ones, minimizing the surface area exposed to warmer air. As the ice house filled, the final layer would be covered with a thick blanket of straw or sawdust before the doors were sealed for the season. The social organization around ice harvesting reflected medieval European society's structure. In some regions, ice rights belonged to landowners who controlled access to frozen lakes and ponds on their property. These lords might sell ice or grant harvesting privileges to tenants and villagers. Monasteries, with their need for food preservation and their organizational capacity, often maintained sophisticated ice houses and managed extensive harvesting operations. In towns and cities, the ice trade began to take organized form, though it remained far more modest than what would later develop. Ice merchants emerged, middlemen who coordinated harvesting crews and sold ice to those who could afford it. Wealthy households maintained their own ice houses, smaller versions of commercial structures where servants would carefully manage the precious supply through summer months. The uses of stored ice in medieval Europe were practical and, for the privileged, luxurious. Monasteries and noble households used ice to preserve fish during Lent and other religious fasting periods when fresh options were limited. Medicinal applications drew on ancient traditions, with physicians believing that cooling substances had therapeutic properties for various ailments. And for those of sufficient wealth, chilled beverages and cold foods represented tangible demonstrations of prosperity and refinement. The seasonal nature of ice harvesting created a calendar within the calendar, an annual cycle that rural communities anticipated and planned for. Winter harvesting was physically demanding, but also socially important, bringing communities together for shared labor. The quality of each winter's freeze, the thickness of the ice, and the success of the harvest influenced the coming year's food security and commercial prospects. As centuries passed, the techniques of ice harvesting became more refined, the storage methods more effective, and the social infrastructure more developed. This medieval foundation of practical ice management would eventually support the commercial ice industries that would flourish in later centuries, connecting frozen lakes in cold regions to consumers in places where ice was rare or unknown. In the quiet efficiency of these ice houses, in the careful planning of harvest crews, and in the gradual improvement of storage techniques. Medieval Europeans built upon ancient wisdom while creating their own contributions to humanity's long effort to preserve the cold. The gentle waves lapped against the wooden docks of Boston Harbor as dawn broke over the frozen landscape of New England in the winter of 1806. A young merchant named Frederick Tudor stood surveying the thick ice that covered Fresh Pond in Cambridge, Massachusetts. What others saw as merely a seasonal inconvenience, Tudor perceived as opportunity wrapped in crystalline form. In his mind, he was already calculating the possibilities of harvesting this abundant natural resource and transporting it to distant lands where ice was an unknown luxury. Tudor came from a prosperous Boston family, but he harbored ambitions that struck his contemporaries as peculiar, if not outright foolish. While others pursued conventional trades in textiles or shipping traditional goods, Tudor fixated on a seemingly impossible dream: sending ice from frozen New England to the tropical Caribbean. His family and friends considered the scheme absurd. Ice, after all, melted. How could anyone profit from shipping a product that would disappear before reaching its destination? Yet Frederick Tudor possessed a stubborn determination that bordered on obsession. In 1806, at the age of 23, he made his first attempt at the ice trade. He purchased a cargo of ice cut from his family's estate pond and arranged for it to be loaded aboard a ship bound for Martinique. The venture faced obstacles from the very beginning. Ship captains were reluctant to carry what they viewed as worthless cargo. No one wanted to insure a shipment of frozen water. The harbour master in Boston watched with bemused skepticism as workers struggled to load the unfamiliar cargo. When the ice finally arrived in Martinique, Tudor encountered yet another challenge he had not fully anticipated. The local population had never seen ice before and had no understanding of its value or uses. Without proper storage facilities waiting at the destination, much of the precious cargo melted away in the tropical heat. Tudor's first venture into the ice trade resulted in substantial financial loss, but rather than abandoning his vision, he became more determined to solve the practical problems that had defeated him. Over the following years, Tudor methodically addressed each obstacle. He experimented with different insulating materials to slow the melting process during transport. Sawdust proved remarkably effective, creating a protective barrier around the ice blocks. He worked with shipbuilders to design vessels with specialized holds that could maintain cooler temperatures. He developed relationships with ship captains willing to take on this unusual cargo, and devised contracts that made the arrangement profitable for all parties involved. Perhaps most importantly, Tudor recognized that he needed to create demand for his product in tropical markets. He began traveling to destinations ahead of his ice shipments, working with local entrepreneurs to build proper ice houses where the frozen blocks could be stored upon arrival. He gave away ice to influential residents and demonstrated its uses in preserving food and creating cold beverages. He convinced bartenders and cafe owners to serve chilled drinks, creating a taste for luxury that only his ice could satisfy. The process was gradual and often discouraging. Tudor faced bankruptcy more than once. Creditors pursued him, and he spent time in debtor's prison. Yet each setback taught him something valuable about the intricate logistics of his unusual trade. He kept detailed records of which insulating materials worked best, which shipping routes minimized melting, and which markets showed the greatest promise for sustained demand. By the 1820s, Tudor's persistence began yielding results. The ice trade to the Caribbean became profitable, and he expanded his operations to new markets. In 1833, he achieved a remarkable milestone when he shipped ice to Calcutta, India, a journey of 4 months across the equator. This voyage represented the ultimate test of his refined techniques. The ice was cut during the coldest days of the Massachusetts winter, insulated with thick layers of sawdust and packed tightly in specially designed holds. Against all odds, enough ice survived the 16,000-mile journey to make the venture worthwhile. The successful shipment to India captured public imagination and established Tudor as a figure of international renown. Newspapers proclaimed him the Ice King, and his trade became a symbol of American ingenuity and determination. What had once seemed like a fool's errand had become a thriving industry. Tudor's success attracted competitors and imitators. The ice harvesting business expanded throughout New England, transforming winter landscapes into scenes of intensive industrial activity. Frozen ponds and lakes became valuable commercial resources. The work created employment for thousands of men during the winter months, when other forms of agricultural and outdoor labor were impossible. The ice had to be harvested with precision and care. Workers scored the frozen surface with special plows pulled by horses, creating a grid pattern across the ice field. Then teams of men used long saws to cut along these lines, separating individual blocks weighing up to 300 pounds each. The blocks were floated along channels to collection points, then hoisted from the water and transported to storage houses. The work was cold and demanding, but it provided reliable income during the lean winter season. Storage facilities grew larger and more sophisticated. Tudor and his competitors built massive ice houses with double walls filled with insulating materials. These structures could hold thousands of tons of ice, keeping it frozen through the summer months until it could be shipped to distant markets. The ice houses themselves became landmarks in communities throughout New England, visible symbols of this peculiar trade that had emerged from one man's unlikely vision. The Ice King's enterprise had transformed not just his own fortunes, but had opened new possibilities in food preservation and comfort in warm climates. Ships laden with New England ice became regular sights in harbors from Charleston to Havana, from New Orleans to Rio de Janeiro. Each cargo carried not just frozen water, but the promise of cold drinks on sweltering days, fresh food preserved for longer periods, and a touch of winter luxury under tropical skies. As Frederick Tudor stood in his later years, watching crews harvest ice from the same ponds where he had first conceived his dream, he could take satisfaction in having created an industry from nothing but frozen water and stubborn determination. The commercial ice trade he pioneered would continue to grow, reaching ever more distant markets and transforming expectations about what was possible in an age before mechanical refrigeration. His legacy was written not in words but in ice, shipped across oceans to melt slowly in warm places, bringing a taste of New England winter to the far corners of the world. The ice that Frederick Tudor and his fellow New England entrepreneurs had begun harvesting from frozen ponds was about to embark on journeys that would have seemed impossible just decades earlier. By the 1840s, what had started as one man's ambitious dream was transforming into a vast network of commerce that would span the entire globe. carrying frozen blocks across oceans to lands where ice had never been seen before. The ships that departed Boston Harbor, laden with ice, followed routes that traced new patterns across the world's oceans. These vessels, specially designed with double hulls and insulated holds packed with sawdust, became floating warehouses of winter, carrying their precious cargo through tropical waters where the sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden decks above. Inside the holds, wrapped in their protective layers, the blocks of ice from Massachusetts ponds melted slowly, but enough survived these long voyages to make the trade profitable and to astonish people in distant ports. The Caribbean islands were among the first destinations to receive regular shipments of New England ice. In Havana, Cuba, ice arrived as early as the 1830s, transforming the habits of wealthy plantation owners and merchants who could suddenly enjoy cold drinks in the sweltering heat. The novelty of ice in such a climate cannot be overstated. For people who had lived their entire lives in tropical warmth, touching a block of ice was like touching a piece of winter itself, a tangible miracle that defied everything they understood about their world. From the Caribbean, the ice trade extended its reach to South American ports. Rio de Janeiro became a regular destination where ice ships found eager customers among the growing population of European expatriates and wealthy locals. The journey from Boston to Rio covered thousands of miles, crossing the equator where temperatures in the ship's holds would rise despite all insulation efforts. Captains learned to time their voyages carefully, seeking favorable winds and currents that could shave days off the journey and save precious cargo. But the most remarkable route of all stretched from New England to Calcutta, India. This extraordinary trade route required ships to sail around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America or around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa, journeys that could take 4 months or more. The audacity of sending ice such distances seemed almost absurd, yet the trade flourished. Ships would depart Boston loaded with ice blocks weighing up to 300 pounds each, carefully stacked and insulated. 4 months later, vessels would arrive in Calcutta's harbour, and despite the tremendous losses during the voyage, enough ice remained to sell at prices that made the entire enterprise worthwhile. In India, ice became a commodity prized by British colonials and wealthy Indian merchants alike. The British residents of Calcutta had longed for the comforts of home, and ice allowed them to preserve foods in familiar ways and to cool drinks during the oppressive heat of Indian summers. Ice houses were constructed in major Indian cities, large insulated buildings where imported ice could be stored and distributed. These structures became landmarks in cities like Calcutta and Madras, architectural testaments to the global reach of the ice trade. The demand for ice in India grew so substantial that permanent ice houses were built to receive and store the shipments. The ice house in Calcutta, completed in the 1840s, was an impressive structure, with thick walls designed to keep the interior as cool as possible. Workers would unload the ice blocks from arriving ships and pack them carefully in sawdust within the building, creating reserves that would supply the city until the next shipment arrived. The system was inefficient by later standards, but it represented an amazing feat of logistics and determination. Beyond India, ice ships ventured to ports throughout Asia. Singapore, Hong Kong, and Manila all received shipments of New England ice. In each location, the arrival of an ice ship was an event, drawing crowds of curious onlookers who wanted to witness blocks of frozen water in climates where such things seemed impossible. Local merchants quickly recognized opportunities, establishing businesses around ice storage and distribution, creating the infrastructure for a trade that would last until mechanical refrigeration made it obsolete. The impact of this global ice commerce extended far beyond simple novelty. In tropical ports, ice changed medical practices, as doctors could use cold to preserve medicines and to provide cooling treatment for patients suffering from fevers. Hospitals in hot climates could offer better care with access to ice. The food trade was transformed as well. Fish caught in tropical waters could be preserved in ice and transported to markets further inland. Meat could be kept fresh longer. Dairy products, impossible to maintain in hot climates, became available to those who could afford ice. The ice trade also influenced shipping routes and port development worldwide. Cities that became regular stops for ice ships invested in facilities to handle the cargo, building ice houses and developing distribution networks. The economic ripple effects touched many industries. Sawdust, once considered waste from lumber mills, became valuable as insulation material. Shipbuilders specialized in designing vessels optimized for ice transport. Insurance companies developed policies to cover the unusual risks of ice cargo melting during transit. In Australia, ice arrived from Boston and created similar transformations in cities like Sydney and Melbourne. The Australian colonies, developing rapidly in the mid-1800s, welcomed ice as a sign of progress and connection to the wider world. Breweries and food businesses expanded their operations with access to reliable cooling. Social customs changed as well, with cold beverages and ice cream becoming part of urban life even in the warmest seasons. The global ice trade reached its peak in the 1850s and 1860s when hundreds of ships carried ice across the world's oceans each year. The industry employed thousands of workers, from the ice cutters on frozen New England ponds to the laborers who loaded ships, the sailors who transported the cargo, and the workers at distant ports who unloaded and distributed the ice. This vast network of commerce, built around frozen water, seemed firmly established as a permanent feature of global trade. Yet even as the ice trade flourished, changes were stirring that would eventually render it obsolete. In laboratories and workshops, inventors and scientists were developing a different approach to cooling, one that didn't depend on winter weather or long ocean voyages. The scientific understanding of heat and cold was advancing, and mechanical means of creating cold were being explored. But for now, in this remarkable moment of the mid-19th century, the ice harvested from American ponds continued its journey across tropical seas, bringing winter's cold to summer lands and changing the world in ways both practical and profound. The ice that arrived in distant ports, carefully packed in sawdust and stored in specially designed holds, seemed like magic to those who received it. Yet even as ships carried frozen blocks across the equator and merchants built fortunes on this crystalline cargo, a quiet revolution was stirring in laboratories and studies across Europe and America. Scientists were beginning to ask fundamental questions that would change everything. What exactly was cold? What was heat? And could understanding these mysteries allow humanity to create winter whenever and wherever it was needed. For thousands of years, people had observed that some things felt hot, while others felt cold. But the true nature of these sensations remained shrouded in mystery. Many learned minds believed that heat was a kind of invisible fluid they called caloric that flowed from warmer objects into cooler ones. According to this theory, when you held your hands near a fire, caloric flowed from the flames into your skin. When ice melted in your palm, caloric from your warm hand flowed into the frozen water. The theory seemed to explain much of what people observed in daily life, and it held sway over scientific thinking for generations. The first significant cracks in this elegant theory appeared through the work of curious experimenters who measured and quantified what previous generations had only described. In the early 1700s, a German physicist named Daniel Gabriel Fahrenheit developed a reliable mercury thermometer and created a temperature scale that bore his name. His careful work allowed scientists to measure heat with unprecedented precision. Around the same time, Swedish astronomer Anders Celsius proposed his own temperature scale, dividing the difference between water's freezing and boiling points into 100 equal degrees. These tools transform the study of heat from philosophy into something that could be measured, recorded, and analyzed with mathematical rigor. As thermometers became more sophisticated, scientists noticed puzzling phenomena that the caloric theory struggled to explain. Joseph Black, a Scottish physician and chemist working in the mid-1700s, made discoveries that would prove fundamental to understanding refrigeration. Through patient experimentation, Black observed that when ice melted, it absorbed a tremendous amount of heat without changing temperature. The ice remained at the freezing point even as it drew heat from its surroundings, transforming from solid to liquid. He called this hidden heat latent heat, and his discovery revealed that the relationship between heat and temperature was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Black's work with latent heat explained mysteries that had puzzled observers for centuries. It clarified why a bucket of ice water could remain at the same cool temperature for a long time as the ice gradually melted, and why sweating cooled the human body as perspiration evaporated from skin. This principle of latent heat, the energy required to change a substance from one state to another without changing its temperature, would become one of the cornerstones of refrigeration technology. Every cooling system ever developed would rely on this fundamental truth that Black uncovered through careful observation. While Black studied the behavior of heat, other scientists were developing broader theories about energy and motion. Benjamin Thompson, an American-born scientist who became Count Rumford of Bavaria, challenged the caloric theory through a famous experiment. While supervising the boring of cannon barrels in Munich, he noticed that the drilling process generated seemingly endless amounts of heat. If heat were truly a fluid contained in the metal, Rumford reasoned, eventually the supply should run out. Instead, as long as the drilling continued, heat kept appearing. He proposed that heat was not a substance at all, but rather a form of motion, an idea that flew in the face of accepted wisdom. The notion that heat was related to motion gained support from the work of scientists studying gases. In the late 1700s and early 1800s, researchers discovered mathematical relationships between the pressure, volume, and temperature of gases. These gas laws, as they became known, revealed predictable patterns in how gases behaved when compressed or allowed to expand. When a gas was compressed, it grew warmer. When it expanded, it cooled. These observations would prove essential to developing mechanical refrigeration, though the full implications weren't immediately obvious to those conducting the experiment. The understanding of thermodynamics, the science of heat and energy, deepened throughout the 1800s as scientists across Europe shared observations and theories. French engineer Sadi Carnot studied the efficiency of heat engines and described fundamental limits on how well such machines could convert heat into useful work. His insights into how heat naturally flows from hot objects, guignets, to cold ones, and the impossibility of reversing this flow without adding energy, helped establish the laws that govern all refrigeration systems. James Prescott Joule, an English physicist and brewer, conducted meticulous experiments demonstrating that mechanical work could be converted into heat with precise mathematical relationships. He showed that energy could change forms, but could not be created or destroyed, establishing the principle of energy conservation. William Thomson, who would become Lord Kelvin, synthesized these various insights into a comprehensive theory of thermodynamics and developed an absolute temperature scale that started at the point where all molecular motion ceased. These theoretical advances might seem distant from the practical business of keeping food fresh or making ice, yet they provided the essential foundation for mechanical refrigeration. Understanding that gases cooled when they expanded, that phase changes absorbed heat, and that heat naturally flowed from warm to cold, allowed inventors to imagine machines that could move heat against its natural direction. If you could make a fluid evaporate, it would absorb heat from its surroundings. If you could then compress that vapor back into a liquid somewhere else, it would release that heat. By cycling a fluid through evaporation and condensation, through expansion and compression, you could effectively pump heat from one place to another, creating cold in one location and warmth in another. The scientists developing these theories rarely worked in isolation. Letters traveled between researchers across national boundaries, sharing experimental results and mathematical formulas. Scientific societies published journals where discoveries were announced and debated. What emerged was a collective understanding, built by many minds over many decades, that revealed the true nature of heat and cold. This knowledge, abstract and mathematical though it was, opened the door to a future where humanity would no longer depend on winter's ice or nature's cold. As the 1800s progressed and scientific understanding deepened, inventors increasingly had the theoretical tools they needed to design practical cooling machines. The age of harvesting natural ice would continue for decades more, but its eventual replacement was becoming inevitable. The next chapter in the story of refrigeration would belong not to those who cut blocks from frozen ponds, but to those who could create cold through human ingenuity and mechanical skill. The scientific understanding of heat and cold that emerged through the 18th century opened a door that curious minds were eager to step through. If philosophers and experimenters now understood that cold was simply the absence of heat, and that heat could be transferred from one substance to another, then perhaps, just perhaps, humanity need not rely solely on nature's ice and snow. Perhaps machines could be built to create cold on demand at any time of year, in any climate. The first person to successfully demonstrate artificial refrigeration in a controlled scientific setting was William Cullen, a Scottish physician and chemist working at the University of Glasgow. On a day in 1748, Cullen stood before an audience of curious colleagues and performed an experiment that would echo through the centuries that followed. His apparatus was simple by modern standards, yet revolutionary in concept. He placed a small quantity of ethyl ether in a container within a partial vacuum. As the ether evaporated rapidly in the reduced pressure, it absorbed heat from its surroundings. The result was remarkable. A thin layer of ice formed on the surface of the container. Cullen's demonstration proved that cold could be manufactured through a process entirely separate from harvesting ice or gathering snow. The principle he revealed was evaporative cooling, a phenomenon that observant people had noticed for millennia. How water evaporating from skin creates a cooling sensation, or how a clay pot sweating moisture keeps its contents cool. But Cullen had harnessed this natural process deliberately, systematically, to create freezing temperatures in a warm room. He carefully documented his findings and shared them with the scientific community, though he himself did not pursue the practical applications of his discovery. For Cullen, the experiment was about understanding nature's laws rather than building commercial machines. For several decades after Cullen's demonstration, his discovery remained largely a scientific curiosity. The apparatus required to create even small amounts of cooling was delicate and expensive. The process consumed considerable energy and materials. Yet the seed had been planted in the minds of inventors and engineers across Europe and beyond. If a small amount of ice could be created in a laboratory, might it be possible to scale up the process? Could machines be built that would produce useful quantities of cold? The early decades of the 19th century saw a flowering of experimentation with artificial refrigeration. These were years when the Industrial Revolution was transforming manufacturing, when steam engines were reshaping transportation, when inventors and tinkerers enjoyed growing prestige and support. The quest to create mechanical cold attracted attention from diverse corners of the scientific and engineering world. In the 1820s, several experimenters began working with vapor compression as a method of refrigeration. The principle was elegant in its logic. Certain substances, when compressed, release heat. When allowed to expand, they absorb heat from their surroundings. By creating a closed system where a working fluid could be compressed and expanded in a continuous cycle, it might be possible to move heat from one place to another, effectively creating a cold space by removing heat from it. These early experiments were conducted by men whose names would become footnotes in the history of cooling, yet whose patient work laid essential groundwork. They worked in workshops and laboratories, often at their own expense, driven by the conviction that artificial refrigeration could become practical and profitable. They tested different substances as working fluids: ether, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and various other compounds. They designed pistons and pumps and valves. They measured temperatures and pressures, keeping meticulous notebooks filled with observations and calculations. The challenges they faced were substantial. Materials that could withstand the pressures involved while remaining sealed against leaks were difficult to manufacture with the tools available. The working fluids themselves could be dangerous. Ammonia had a pungent, choking odor. Ether was highly flammable. Some substances were corrosive to metal pipes and containers. The machinery needed to compress gases efficiently required precision engineering that pushed the capabilities of early industrial workshops. Yet gradually, through persistence and incremental improvement, these experimenters began to achieve modest successes. Small machines that could produce limited amounts of cooling for brief periods. Apparatus that could lower the temperature of a small chamber by a few degrees. These achievements might seem trivial by modern standards, but they represented crucial proof that the theoretical understanding of heat transfer could be translated into working mechanisms. One of the fascinating aspects of this early experimental period was how geographically dispersed it was. In Scotland, England, France, Germany, and America, inventors were pursuing similar goals along parallel paths, often unaware of each other's work. Communication between scientific communities was slow, traveling by letter and published papers that might take months to cross oceans. Yet the same fundamental principles of thermodynamics were being explored and applied by minds separated by thousands of miles. The atmosphere in these early workshops must have been one of cautious optimism mixed with frequent frustration. An apparatus would work for a time, then fail as a seal gave way or a pipe cracked under pressure. A particularly promising design would prove too expensive to build at any practical scale. A working fluid that seemed ideal would turn out to have dangerous properties that made it unsuitable for widespread use. Each setback required patience, analysis, and renewed effort. Some experimenters approached the problem from purely theoretical angles, seeking to understand the mathematics and physics that governed heat transfer and phase changes. Others were practical tinkerers, more interested in building devices that worked than in understanding exactly why they worked. The most successful combined both approaches, grounding their designs in sound scientific principles, while remaining willing to try unconventional solutions and learn from failures. As the 1830s approached, the pace of progress began to accelerate. The foundational experiments had been conducted. The basic principles were increasingly well understood. The stage was being set for the emergence of the first truly practical refrigeration machines, devices that could produce useful amounts of cold reliably enough to support commercial applications. The age of mechanical refrigeration was about to dawn, transforming industries and eventually touching the daily lives of ordinary people around the world. The quiet work happening in these laboratories and workshops represented more than just technical achievement. These experimenters were proving that human ingenuity could replicate and improve upon natural processes that had previously been beyond our control. They were demonstrating that the careful application of scientific knowledge could yield machines that would reshape commerce, diet, medicine, and comfort. And they were doing so with the patient, methodical approach that characterizes the best of human invention, building knowledge piece by piece, learning from each success and failure, moving steadily toward a future that would have seemed like magic to their grandparents. The understanding that cold could be created, rather than simply harvested from nature, opened a door that inventors across the world rushed to walk through. By the 1830s, the theoretical knowledge existed, but transforming that knowledge into machines that could reliably produce cold for practical purposes remained an extraordinary challenge. What the world needed were not just scientists with theories, but engineers and inventors willing to dedicate years of their lives to solving countless technical problems, one after another, until a working refrigeration machine emerged. In London, an American expatriate named Jacob Perkins occupied himself with this very challenge. Perkins was already an accomplished inventor, having worked on improvements to printing presses and various mechanical devices. But the problem of artificial refrigeration captured his imagination in a way few other projects had. He understood that the key lay in controlling the cycle of compression and expansion of volatile fluids, forcing them to absorb heat in one place and release it in another. The concept was elegant in theory, but engineering a machine that could accomplish this continuously and reliably required solving dozens of interconnected mechanical problems. Working through the early 1830s, Perkins developed what would become known as the vapor compression refrigeration system. His design used ether as the working fluid, which would evaporate at low temperatures, absorbing heat as it changed from liquid to gas. A compressor would then squeeze this vapor, raising its temperature so that it could release its heat to the surrounding air. As the compressed vapor cooled, it would condense back into liquid, and the cycle would begin again. This closed-loop system meant the refrigerant could be used over and over, continuously moving heat from one place to another. In 1834, Perkins received a British patent for his refrigeration machine. The device actually worked, producing ice and maintaining cold temperatures without any natural ice at all. Yet despite this technical achievement, Perkins struggled to find commercial applications for his invention. The natural ice trade was thriving, and ice remained relatively inexpensive and readily available in London and other northern cities, convincing businesses to invest in expensive, complex machinery when they could simply purchase ice proved nearly impossible. Perkins had created a solution in search of a problem that most people didn't yet realize they had. Across the Atlantic, in the hot, humid climate of Florida, a physician named John Gorrie approached refrigeration from an entirely different motivation. Gorrie worked in the town of Apalachicola, where he treated patients suffering from tropical diseases, particularly malaria and yellow fever. Like many doctors of his era, Gorrie believed that cooling the air in sick rooms could help reduce fevers and improve patient outcomes. He had experimented with suspending basins of ice from the ceilings of hospital rooms, allowing the cooled air to sink and create a more comfortable environment for his patients. But Apalachicola was far from the ice harvesting regions of the north, and ice had to be shipped long distances at great expense. Sometimes, shipments would arrive completely melted, or ice supplies would run out entirely during the hottest months when Gorrie needed them most. This unreliability frustrated the dedicated physician and set him thinking about whether artificial ice might be possible. Gorrie began experimenting with compression refrigeration in the early 1840s. His approach used air rather than ether or other volatile liquids. By compressing air and then allowing it to expand rapidly, he could create significant cooling. This cooled air could then be passed over water to freeze it into ice. Gorrie's machine was bulky and complex, with pumps, pistons, and various mechanical components all working together in a carefully orchestrated sequence. By 1845, Gorey had developed a working ice-making machine. At a celebration in Apalachicola, he demonstrated his invention by serving guests cold drinks chilled with ice his machine had produced. For people accustomed to the idea that ice could only come from frozen northern waters, the sight of ice being manufactured in tropical Florida seemed almost magical. Gorey envisioned a future where his machines would cool hospitals, homes, and public buildings throughout the warm regions of the world. In 1851, Gorey received an American patent for his ice-making apparatus. He attempted to attract investors and promote his invention, writing about the potential applications and benefits. He imagined refrigerated ships that could transport fresh food without spoilage, cooled warehouses that could store perishable goods, and air-conditioned buildings that would make hot climates more comfortable. His vision was remarkably prescient, anticipating developments that would indeed transform the world in the coming decades. Yet Gorey faced obstacles similar to those that had stymied Perkins. The natural ice trade was enormously powerful, and ice merchants had no interest in promoting a technology that would make their business obsolete. Some critics even spread rumors, questioning whether Gorey's machine truly worked, or suggesting his ice was actually just regular ice he claimed to have manufactured. The physician struggled to find financial backing, and the stress of trying to commercialize his invention while continuing his medical practice took a toll on his health. John Gorey died in 1855, disappointed and largely unrecognized, though history would later acknowledge him as a pioneer of refrigeration and air conditioning. While Perkins and Gorey worked on their designs, other inventors pursued different approaches to creating artificial cold. In Australia, James Harrison, a Scottish immigrant who worked as a newspaper editor and printer, noticed that ether used for cleaning printing type had a pronounced cooling effect. Intrigued, Harrison began experimenting with refrigeration in the 1850s. He developed a vapor compression system using ether, similar in principle to Perkins's design, but with various mechanical improvements. Harrison's timing and location proved more favorable than those of earlier inventors. Australia's growing meat industry desperately needed refrigeration to preserve products in the warm climate and to enable exports to distant markets. In 1857, Harrison produced a working refrigeration machine that was used by a brewery in Bendigo. The success of this installation led to other applications, and Harrison continued refining his designs throughout the 1860s. What all these early inventors shared was the fundamental challenge of making refrigeration not just possible, but practical and economical. Their machines worked, demonstrating that artificial cold was achievable, but the devices were expensive to build, complex to operate, and required skilled attention to keep running. They consumed significant amounts of power, and sometimes used refrigerants that were flammable or toxic. Each successful installation taught valuable lessons, revealing problems that the next generation of machines would need to address. The 1830s and 1840s thus marked a crucial transition in humanity's relationship with cold. For thousands of years, cold had been something people could only find in nature and attempt to preserve. Now, engineers had demonstrated that cold could be manufactured on demand. The practical refrigerators developed during these decades were imperfect and limited, but they proved the concept worked. The door had been opened, and though widespread adoption would take more years of refinement and development, the path forward had been illuminated by these determined pioneers who believed machines could accomplish what nature had previously provided. The machines that could manufacture cold were no longer mere curiosities confined to hospitals and experimental laboratories. By the 1860s and 1870s, practical refrigeration systems had proven themselves capable of creating ice and maintaining cold temperatures reliably. Now came the question that would reshape civilization itself. Could these machines be made to travel? Consider the challenge that had faced humanity since the beginning of trade. Fresh meat could not travel far from where the animal had been raised. Milk soured within days. Fish had to be consumed near the waters where they were caught or preserved through salting and smoking. Fruits and vegetables traveled poorly beyond their regions of cultivation. The world's diet remained stubbornly local, bound by the tyranny of distance and the relentless march of decay. In the Australian colonies, millions of sheep grazed vast pastures, yet the people of London had little access to this bounty. In the American Midwest, cattle roamed endless grasslands while East Coast cities paid premium prices for meat. Argentina possessed rich agricultural lands that could feed multitudes, but the Atlantic Ocean stood as an insurmountable barrier to delivering fresh provisions to European markets. Somewhere in this gap between abundance and need, fortunes waited to be made. The railway presented the first frontier for refrigerated transport. In the United States, several inventors and entrepreneurs recognized that refrigerated railway cars could bridge the distance between the great stockyards of Chicago and the hungry cities of the East. Early attempts involved simply packing ice around meat in insulated boxcars, a mobile version of the ice boxes that people used in their homes. These primitive refrigerated cars met with mixed success. Ice melted, insulation proved inadequate, and meat often arrived spoiled or frozen solid in unpredictable patterns. Gustavus Swift, a Massachusetts-born meat dealer who had moved to Chicago, became obsessed with improving refrigerated rail transport in the late 1870s. He understood that whoever could reliably ship fresh dressed beef from the Midwest to eastern cities would transform the meat industry entirely. Working with engineer Andrew Chase, Swift developed an improved refrigerated car that suspended meat carcasses from hooks, allowing cold air to circulate around them evenly. Ice compartments at both ends of the car, combined with careful insulation and ventilation, maintained temperatures consistently throughout the journey. The innovation seemed obvious in retrospect, but established interests resisted fiercely. Traditional butchers in eastern cities who slaughtered local cattle saw their livelihoods threatened. Railway companies that had invested in livestock cars worried about their existing equipment becoming obsolete. Even consumers initially distrusted meat that had traveled so far from its source. Yet the economics proved irresistible. Shipping dressed beef rather than live cattle meant no need to transport the inedible portions of the animal, no weight loss from the stress of travel, and no feeding costs along the journey. By the 1880s, refrigerated railway cars had become commonplace across America, and the patterns of food distribution began their profound transformation. Breweries in Milwaukee could ship beer to distant markets. Dairy products from Wisconsin reached tables hundreds of miles away. The seasonal nature of fresh food availability began to fade as produce from warmer climates traveled north during winter months. The ocean presented an even greater challenge than the railway. Sea voyages from South America or Australia to Europe could take months. The motion of waves, the salt air, the limited space for ice storage, and the sheer duration of the journey seemed to place insurmountable obstacles before refrigerated shipping. Yet the rewards for success were equally enormous. In France, Charles Tellier had been experimenting with mechanical refrigeration systems since the 1850s. He envisioned ships whose cargo holds would be kept cold not by melting ice, but by continuous refrigeration machinery. In 1876, his vision took physical form in the Frigorifique, a ship fitted with a mechanical refrigeration system using methyl ether as a refrigerant. The vessel carried meat from Argentina to France, a journey of several months, with most of the cargo arriving in acceptable condition. The voyage proved that mechanical refrigeration could function at sea, though the technology still needed refinement. Meanwhile, other innovators pursued similar dreams. In Australia and New Zealand, vast flocks of sheep represented potential wealth that could not reach distant markets. Several experimental shipments attempted to transport frozen mutton to England, each voyage teaching new lessons about insulation, temperature control, and the challenge of maintaining frozen conditions throughout a long sea journey. The breakthrough voyage came in 1882, when the ship Dunedin departed New Zealand, carrying nearly 5,000 frozen sheep and lamb carcasses bound for London. The refrigeration system, designed by a Scottish engineer named William Davidson, cycled compressed air through pipes in the cargo hold. The voyage took 98 days, crossing the equator and passing through tropical waters. When the Dunedin arrived in London and opened its refrigerated hold, the meat emerged in excellent condition, still solidly frozen and suitable for sale. The implications rippled across the global economy, like waves spreading from a stone dropped in still water. New Zealand and Australia suddenly had access to British markets for their agricultural abundance. Argentina could ship beef across the Atlantic. California fruit growers could contemplate sending their harvest to distant cities. The geography of food production began its long divorce from the geography of food consumption. Shipping companies raced to install refrigeration systems in their fleets. By the 1890s, refrigerated ships regularly crossed the world's oceans, their insulated holds carrying meat, butter, cheese, fruit, and other perishables that would have been impossible to transport just decades earlier. The technology continued improving with each iteration. Engineers developed more efficient refrigeration systems, better insulation materials, and more reliable temperature controls. The social and economic consequences unfolded gradually, but inevitably. Port cities grew larger as they became nodes in the global refrigerated trade network. New Zealand evolved into a major exporter of lamb and dairy products. Argentine beef became available in European markets. The seasonal rhythms that had governed human diet since the beginning of agriculture began to blur as products from opposite hemispheres crossed paths on the world's shipping lanes. For the first time in human history, fresh food could traverse the globe. The local harvest no longer defined what appeared on dinner tables. Winter no longer meant the end of fresh provisions. Distance had not been conquered entirely, but its power had been diminished substantially. The machines that made cold had learned to travel, and in doing so, they had begun to weave the world together in ways that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations. As these refrigerated ships and railway cars multiplied, they laid the foundation for the modern food system. creating connections between distant places and enabling populations to grow in regions far from agricultural production. The cold that moved through pipes and coils was quietly reshaping human civilization itself. As refrigerated ships and railway cars began crisscrossing continents and oceans, transforming how the world ate and traded, another industry was quietly wrestling with its own temperature challenges. In the breweries of Europe, particularly in Germany, the ancient craft of beer making confronted the limitations of seasonal production and the unpredictable nature of fermentation. For centuries, brewers had worked according to the calendar, not by choice, but by necessity. The best beer required cool temperatures during fermentation, which meant that traditional brewing could only happen during the colder months. In Bavaria, laws even prohibited brewing during summer, recognizing that warm weather brought spoiled batches and undrinkable results. Brewers filled their deep cellars with winter ice, hoping their supplies would last through spring and into early summer. But this was always a gamble against the warming seasons. The problem was not merely inconvenient, it was a matter of chemistry that brewers understood through observation, even if they lacked the scientific language to describe it precisely. When fermentation temperatures rose too high, wild yeasts and bacteria competed with the carefully cultivated brewing yeasts, creating off flavors and sometimes rendering entire vats worthless. The beer could sour, develop unpleasant aromas, or fail to develop the crisp, clean flavors that drinkers expected. Into this challenge stepped Carl von Linde, a young professor of engineering at the Munich Polytechnic in the late 1860s. Linde had been studying thermodynamics and heat transfer, the same scientific principles that fascinated researchers across Europe during this era of industrial innovation. When Gabriel Sedlmayr, the owner of the Spartan Brewery in Munich, approached him with the brewery's temperature control problems, Linde recognized an opportunity to apply theoretical knowledge to a practical problem that had vexed brewers for generations. Sedlmayr's brewery represented the scale of the challenge. Large brewing operations consumed enormous quantities of ice, hauled from frozen lakes and mountains during winter, and stored in insulated cellars. The expense was substantial, the supply was uncertain, and the whole enterprise depended on winter being cold enough to produce good ice. A warm winter could spell disaster for the coming year's production. Linde began working on a refrigeration system specifically designed for brewery applications in 1873. Unlike the experimental machines that had come before, which were often unreliable and inefficient, Linde approached the problem with the precision of an engineer who understood both the theoretical principles and the practical requirements. His machine used the compression and expansion of gases to remove heat from the brewery cellars, maintaining the steady, cool temperatures that fermentation required. The first Linde refrigeration machine was installed at Sedlmayr's Spartan Brewery in 1873, and it performed beyond expectations. For the first time, a brewery could maintain precise temperatures year-round without depending on natural ice. The implications rippled outward immediately. Breweries could now operate continuously, expanding production during summer months when demand was actually highest. They could establish themselves in warm climates where brewing had previously been impractical. The quality and consistency of their product improved dramatically. Other German breweries quickly recognized what this technology meant for their industry. Within just a few years, Linde had installed refrigeration systems in breweries across Bavaria and beyond. The Brewery Connection proved to be the perfect testing ground for refrigeration technology because breweries had the capital to invest in expensive equipment. They had a clear economic incentive to solve their temperature problems, and they operated at a scale that justified the engineering effort required. Linde continued refining his designs, making them more efficient and reliable. He founded the Linde Ice Machine Company in 1879, which would become one of the world's leading manufacturers of industrial refrigeration equipment. His innovations included improvements in compressor design, better understanding of which refrigerants work most efficiently, and methods for precisely controlling temperatures within narrow ranges. The brewing industry's adoption of mechanical refrigeration had effects that reached far beyond beer production. The systems developed for breweries proved adaptable to other industries that needed reliable cooling. Meat packing plants, dairy operations, and cold storage facilities all benefited from the engineering advances driven by brewers' needs. The knowledge gained from installing and operating these systems created a body of practical expertise that engineers could draw upon for new applications. In a quiet way, the partnership between brewing and refrigeration engineering also demonstrated something important about technological progress. Sometimes the most significant advances come not from theoretical research alone, but from applying scientific knowledge to solve specific, practical problems for industries willing to invest in solutions. The brewery industry provided the financial support, the clear objectives, and the feedback that allowed refrigeration technology to evolve from experimental devices into reliable industrial equipment. Linde himself became recognized as one of the founding figures of refrigeration engineering. His careful, systematic approach to designing cooling systems established principles that would guide the field for generations. He understood that successful refrigeration required more than just making things cold. It required precise control, energy efficiency, reliability over long periods of operation, and designs that could be maintained and repaired by ordinary workers, rather than requiring constant attention from expert engineers. The breweries of Munich and other German cities, once limited by the seasons and dependent on winter ice harvests, now hummed with activity year-round. The cold, clean lager beers that German brewers had perfected could now be produced consistently and exported worldwide, their quality assured by the steady temperatures that refrigeration provided. What had begun as a seasonal craft, practiced only during the colder months, had become a modern industry, operating according to its own schedule rather than nature's calendar. As the 19th century drew toward its close, the lessons learned in brewery cellars and fermentation rooms had helped transform refrigeration from a promising but unreliable technology into a practical tool that industries could depend upon. The beer that workers enjoyed after a long day had been made possible by the same scientific principles that would soon keep their food fresh, cool their homes, and reshape the rhythm of daily life in ways both profound and subtle. As the brewing industry refined mechanical refrigeration into a precise science, the technology that had once seemed the exclusive domain of factories and commercial enterprises began its quiet migration into the everyday lives of ordinary people. But this transformation would not happen overnight. Before the electric refrigerator hummed in American kitchens, there existed a transitional era when most households relied on a simpler solution, the icebox. The icebox represented an elegant compromise between ancient ice harvesting traditions and modern manufacturing. These insulated wooden cabinets, which began appearing in middle-class homes during the 1830s and grew increasingly common through the late 19th century, required no machinery, no complex mechanisms, and no scientific expertise to operate. They simply needed ice, delivered regularly to the doorstep, and the careful attention of whoever managed the household. The design of a typical icebox reflected generations of accumulated wisdom about insulation and air circulation. Craftsmen constructed these cabinets from hardwoods like oak or ash, creating an outer shell that housed the visible compartment doors. Between this outer layer and an inner lining of zinc, tin, or porcelain, they packed insulating materials. Early ice boxes used sawdust, cork, or charcoal to slow the transfer of heat. As manufacturers refined their designs, they experimented with different insulating substances, always seeking materials that would make each block of ice last a little longer. Inside the cabinet, the arrangement followed simple principles of physics. The ice compartment sat at the top of the box, typically holding a 25 to 50-pound block. As the ice gradually melted, it absorbed heat from the air around it, creating a descending current of cold air that settled into the food storage compartments below. Warm air, being lighter, rose back toward the ice in a gentle, continuous circulation. A drainage pan at the bottom of the icebox collected the meltwater, requiring daily emptying unless the household had installed a drain pipe leading outside or to a collection vessel. The arrival of the icebox in a home marked a significant shift in daily routines. Families who had previously kept butter in cool cellars, stored milk in wells, or purchased only what they could consume immediately, now possessed a dedicated cold space in their kitchens. The icebox extended the life of perishables by days rather than hours. Milk that might have soured by afternoon could now last through several breakfast meals. Meat purchased on Saturday could still be safe to eat on Monday. Leftovers from Sunday dinner need not go to waste. This convenience, however, came with its own demands. The household icebox created a new relationship with the iceman, a figure who became as regular a visitor as the milkman or the postman. In cities and towns across America and Europe, ice delivery routes formed intricate networks through residential neighborhoods. Most families displayed a card in their window, indicating how many pounds of ice they needed. The numbers on the card's four sides corresponded to different quantities, and the householder would position the card so the appropriate number faced outward. The Iceman began his rounds in the early morning hours, when the day was still cool and his wagon still fully loaded. He knew his route by heart, every house that took delivery, and their usual requirements. Using heavy iron tongs, he would hoist blocks from his wagon, often covered with canvas or burlap to slow melting. If he needed to break a large block into smaller pieces for a customer who wanted only 10 or 15 pounds, he wielded an ice pick with practiced precision, finding the natural grain where the ice would split cleanly. Watching the Iceman work became one of the small dramas of neighborhood life. Children followed his wagon on hot summer days, hoping to collect chips of ice that fell to the street. Some icemen, good-natured about their young followers, would deliberately knock a few extra fragments loose. The sight of the Iceman climbing front steps with a massive block balanced on his leather-protected shoulder was so common that it became woven into the fabric of daily life, as familiar as the sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones. Managing the icebox itself required attention and strategy. The housewife or household manager needed to consider how to arrange items for maximum efficiency. Foods that needed the coldest temperatures went on the upper shelves, closest to the ice. Items less sensitive to temperature could occupy the lower compartments. The melting rate of the ice depended on how often the box was opened, how well it was packed, and the ambient temperature of the kitchen. During summer heat waves, a block that might last 3 days in spring could disappear in 36 hours. The drip pan presented its own challenge. A forgotten drip pan could overflow, sending water across the kitchen floor. Many households established routines around checking and emptying the pan, often timing it with other daily tasks. Some women remembered to check the pan every time they started preparing a meal. Others emptied it before bed and upon waking. The sound of water dripping into the pan became another background rhythm of home life, occasionally noticed, but mostly accepted. Iceboxes transformed not just food storage, but shopping patterns and meal planning. Before the icebox, most urban households shopped daily at local markets, purchasing only what they would consume that day. The icebox allowed for less frequent shopping trips and enabled families to take advantage of sales or bulk purchases. A household could buy a larger cut of meat when prices were favorable and keep it safely for several days. Fresh vegetables from a Saturday market visit could still be crisp for a Wednesday soup. The ice industry that supported these millions of household iceboxes employed tens of thousands of workers in harvesting, storage, and delivery. Ice houses dotted the landscape near lakes and ponds where winter ice was thick and clean. During the coldest months, teams of men and horses worked on frozen surfaces, sawing the ice into uniform blocks, loading them onto sleds, and hauling them to insulated warehouses where sawdust buried them for preservation through the warm months ahead. As the 19th century drew toward its close, the icebox had become so commonplace in middle-class homes that its presence was simply expected, much as we might expect a stove or sink. Manufacturers competed on craftsmanship, insulation efficiency, and aesthetic appeal. Some iceboxes featured beautifully carved doors and polished brass hardware, designed to be furniture pieces worthy of display rather than hidden in pantries. Yet even as the icebox reached its peak of refinement and ubiquity, the seeds of its obsolescence were already sprouting in laboratories and workshops, where inventors tinkered with electric motors and compressed gases, working toward a vision of refrigeration that would require no daily deliveries, no drip pans, and no iceman climbing the front steps in the gentle light of morning. The icebox had become a familiar fixture in homes across America and Europe. A wooden cabinet lined with tin or zinc, its upper compartment filled with heavy blocks of ice that dripped slowly into catch pans below. But even as families grew accustomed to the daily routines of ice delivery and drip pan emptying, inventors and engineers were working quietly in workshops and laboratories to create something entirely different. The electric refrigerator was coming, though its arrival would be gradual, cautious, and filled with both promise and uncertainty. The journey toward electric refrigeration for the home had begun decades earlier, but bringing this technology into ordinary kitchens proved far more challenging than than anyone had anticipated. Industrial refrigeration systems had been successfully cooling breweries, meatpacking plants, and warehouses since the late 1800s. These were large, complex machines tended by trained operators, their compressors and condensers humming away in dedicated engine rooms. The leap from industrial machinery to a compact appliance that could fit in a kitchen and be operated by anyone seemed almost impossibly ambitious. The earliest attempts at domestic electric refrigerators emerged around the turn of the 20th century. These pioneering machines were awkward contraptions, often consisting of separate components that had to be installed in different parts of the house. The compressor unit might sit in the basement, connected by pipes to the cooling cabinet upstairs in the kitchen. They were noisy, unreliable, and expensive beyond the reach of all but the wealthiest households. Still, they represented something revolutionary. The promise that cold could be created at the flip of a switch, without waiting for the ice wagon or worrying about supplies running out on hot summer days. In 1913, the first self-contained domestic electric refrigerator appeared on the market. Created by a company in Chicago, this unit placed all the mechanical components together in one cabinet, though the design was still far from elegant. The machinery sat on top of the refrigerated compartment, exposed and somewhat intimidating to look at. The device consumed enormous amounts of electricity and cost about the same as 2 automobiles. Few families could justify such an expense when ice delivery worked perfectly well and cost a fraction as much. But the potential was there, glimmering like a promise of the future. Engineers kept refining their designs, making the mechanism smaller, quieter, and more efficient. General Electric introduced their monitor top refrigerator in 1927, named for its distinctive round compressor unit that sat atop the cabinet like the turret of a naval warship. This model proved more reliable than earlier attempts, and its hermetically sealed compressor required less maintenance. Families who purchased these early electric refrigerators marveled at the convenience, the steady cold that never depended on weather or delivery schedules, the freedom from melting ice and constant draining. Around the same time, the Frigidaire Company, which had grown out of an earlier venture called Guardian Refrigerator Company, was also refining its electric refrigerators. By the late 1920s, these appliances were beginning to look less like industrial equipment and more like furniture designed for the home. Manufacturers experimented with different finishes, adding porcelain surfaces that could be cleaned easily, and designing cabinets that would blend into kitchen decor rather than dominate it. Still, adoption remained slow. The Great Depression arrived, and most families found themselves struggling to afford basic necessities, let alone expensive new appliances. An electric refrigerator in 1930 might cost $200 or more, at a time when many workers earned less than $1,500 per year. Iceboxes, meanwhile, could be purchased for a fraction of that amount, and the ice itself remained affordable. The ice industry continued to thrive, with millions of tons of ice delivered to American homes each year throughout the 1930s. Yet the tide was turning, gently but inexorably, as electric refrigerators became more common, even if still relatively rare. They began to change expectations about food storage and kitchen life. These machines maintained more consistent temperatures than iceboxes ever could. There were no warm spots where ice had melted. No daily fluctuations as fresh ice was added. Food stayed cold evenly, reliably, day after day. Families discovered they could keep foods longer, plan meals further in advance, and waste less. The refrigerators themselves continued to improve with each passing year. Manufacturers added features like adjustable shelves, vegetable drawers, and separate compartments for different types of food. They worked to make the compressors quieter, tucking them away beneath the cabinet rather than mounting them on top. The refrigerators grew more energy efficient, using less electricity to maintain their cool interiors. Design became sleeker, more modern, appealing to homeowners who wanted their kitchens to reflect contemporary style. By the late 1930s, as the economy slowly recovered, more families began to consider making the investment. The benefits had become clear through the experiences of early adopters. No more daily ice deliveries to coordinate, no more drip pans to empty, no more worry about ice supplies during heat waves when demand sometimes exceeded what delivery companies could provide. Electric refrigerators offered independence and reliability that the icebox, for all its familiar comfort, could never quite match. World War II brought a pause to civilian appliance production as factories turned to war materials. But when peace returned, the electric refrigerator industry was poised for tremendous growth. Manufacturers had refined their designs during the war years, planning for the day when they could resume production. Returning veterans established new households, and the post-war economic boom meant more families had money to spend. The stage was set for the electric refrigerator to transform from luxury item to standard household appliance. The change happened with surprising speed in the late 1940s and into the 1950s. Prices dropped as production volumes increased and manufacturing techniques improved. What had once cost several months of an average worker's salary could now be purchased for a few weeks' wages. Payment plans made refrigerators even more accessible, allowing families to spread the cost over time. The icebox, which had faithfully served households for generations, began its journey toward obsolescence. As electric refrigerators filled more and more kitchens, the ice delivery business slowly faded away. The men who had driven ice wagons for years, who knew every customer's preference and schedule, found themselves seeking new employment. The massive ice houses that had stored winter's harvest began to empty and fall into disrepair. An entire industry that had seemed permanent and essential was quietly disappearing, replaced by the soft hum of electric compressors and the gentle glow of refrigerator lights clicking on when doors opened in darkened kitchens. As electric refrigerators found their way into more and more homes throughout the 1920s and 1930s, quietly humming in kitchens across the industrialized world, few people gave much thought to the invisible substances flowing through the coiled tubes inside these miraculous boxes. Yet the story of refrigerants, the chemical compounds that actually create the cooling effect, is a fascinating journey through chemistry, engineering, and the unexpected consequences of human innovation. The principle behind mechanical refrigeration had remained essentially unchanged since the earliest vapor compression systems. A substance would absorb heat as it evaporated from liquid to gas, then release that heat when compressed back into liquid form. The challenge lay in finding substances that could perform this transformation efficiently, safely, and reliably at temperatures useful for preserving food and cooling homes. The very first mechanical refrigerators relied on whatever gases experimenters had available and understood. Ether, a substance familiar to chemists and later used as an anesthetic, appeared in some of the earliest laboratory demonstrations. It evaporated readily and could be compressed back into liquid form with relative ease. But ether had alarming drawbacks. It was highly flammable, and in enclosed spaces could form explosive mixtures with air. A leaking refrigerator filled with ether was essentially a bomb waiting for an ignition source. As commercial refrigeration developed in the mid-19th century, ammonia emerged as the refrigerant of choice for large industrial systems. This colorless gas possessed nearly ideal thermodynamic properties for refrigeration. It absorbed and released heat efficiently, worked well across a wide range of temperatures, and remained relatively inexpensive to produce. Breweries, meatpacking plants, and ice-making facilities installed massive ammonia refrigeration systems that operated with impressive reliability. But ammonia carried its own hazards. The gas had a sharp, suffocating odor that could be detected even at very low concentrations. While this meant leaks were noticed quickly, ammonia was also toxic when inhaled in significant amounts. Industrial accidents occasionally occurred when ammonia systems developed leaks in enclosed spaces. Workers might be overcome by fumes, and evacuations became necessary until the leak could be isolated and repaired. For large warehouses and factories with trained operators and safety protocols, these risks could be managed. For a device intended to sit in someone's kitchen, ammonia presented unacceptable dangers. Sulfur dioxide offered another option that refrigeration engineers explored enthusiastically. This gas also had favorable thermal properties and had been used successfully in some of the earlier refrigeration systems. It was non-flammable, which eliminated one major safety concern. However, sulfur dioxide shared ammonia's toxicity problem and added a corrosive quality that could damage components over time. A leak in a home refrigerator using sulfur dioxide could make the kitchen uninhabitable and posed serious health risks to families. Some early household refrigerators used methyl chloride, a substance that seemed to solve many of the problems plaguing other refrigerants. It worked well at the temperatures needed for food storage, wasn't corrosive, and seemed safe enough for home use. For a time in the early 20th century, methyl chloride refrigerators gained popularity, but this refrigerant too had a deadly flaw. Unlike ammonia's unmistakable smell, methyl chloride was nearly odorless at dangerous concentrations. Worse, when exposed to flame or very high heat, it could decompose into toxic compounds. Several tragic accidents in the 1920s, including incidents where leaking refrigerators led to fatalities, made it clear that a better solution was desperately needed. The refrigeration industry faced a dilemma. The substances that worked best thermodynamically were either toxic, flammable, corrosive, or some combination of these undesirable traits. For refrigeration to truly become safe enough for every home, for installation in restaurants and shops and schools, engineers needed refrigerants that possessed the right physical properties, while remaining benign if they escaped their sealed systems. This challenge attracted the attention of Charles Kettering and the research team at General Motors. In 1928, Kettering assigned a young chemist named Thomas Midgley Jr. to investigate whether a safe, non-toxic refrigerant could be synthesized. Midgley approached the problem systematically, studying the periodic table and the properties of various chemical compounds. He focused his attention on a group of synthetic chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, which combine chlorine, fluorine, and carbon atoms in stable molecular arrangements. Working with Albert Henne, Midgley synthesized several promising compounds. The one that emerged as most suitable was dichloro-difluoromethane, which would later be marketed under the trade name Freon 12. This substance possessed remarkable properties. It was non-flammable, non-toxic at normal concentrations, stable, non-corrosive, and had nearly ideal thermodynamic characteristics for refrigeration. In a famous demonstration in 1930, Midgley inhaled a lungful of the gas and then exhaled it to extinguish a candle, dramatically illustrating both its safety and the fact that it was heavier than air. The introduction of Freon and related chlorofluorocarbon refrigerants transformed the refrigeration industry. Manufacturers could now build home refrigerators with confidence that a leak would pose no danger to families. The new refrigerants enabled more compact designs, quieter operation, and greater reliability. Throughout the 1930s and beyond, chlorofluorocarbons became the standard for virtually all refrigeration applications, from small household units to large commercial systems. Different variations of these synthetic refrigerants found specialized uses. Some worked better for very low temperature freezers, others for air conditioning systems, still others for automotive applications. The chemical industry developed an entire family of related compounds, each designated with a number to indicate its specific molecular composition. For decades, these substances seemed to represent the perfect solution to the refrigerant challenge. The story of how we later discovered unexpected environmental consequences of these miracle chemicals would unfold much later. In another chapter of humanity's relationship with refrigeration technology, but in the middle decades of the 20th century, as refrigerators became as common as stoves and the cold chain spread across continents, the quiet circulation of these carefully engineered substances made it all possible. They flowed through countless miles of copper tubing, absorbing heat from food compartments and releasing it into kitchens. Invisible workers in the ongoing human effort to hold back the natural process of decay and keep the future of food preservation running smoothly and safely. As the safer, more reliable refrigerants became widely available, they opened the door to something humanity had never before achieved: an unbroken chain of cold stretching from the moment food left the farm until it reached the dinner table. This concept, which we now call the cold chain, would transform not just how we eat, but where we live, how cities grow, and the very rhythm of daily life. Picture a world where this chain didn't exist. In the early decades of the 20th century, even though home refrigerators were beginning to appear in wealthier households, the journey food took from farm to table remained a precarious one. Milk might be cooled at the dairy, but it traveled in unrefrigerated trucks. Meat could be stored in an icebox at the butcher shop, but sat at room temperature during transport. Vegetables picked in the morning might wilt by afternoon. Each break in the cooling process allowed bacteria to multiply, nutrients to deteriorate, and freshness to fade away like morning mist under a rising sun. The solution required more than just better refrigerators. It demanded a complete reimagining of food distribution, a system where temperature could be controlled at every single step of a product's journey. The infrastructure needed to accomplish this was staggering in its complexity and scope. The transformation began in earnest during the 1920s and 30s as companies started to recognize that refrigeration couldn't be just an endpoint in someone's kitchen. Warehouses were among the first links in this chain to be revolutionized. Large cold storage facilities had existed since the ice harvesting days, but they were crude by modern standards, often struggling to maintain consistent temperatures. The new generation of refrigerated warehouses used mechanical cooling systems that could be precisely controlled, creating vast rooms where thousands of pounds of food could be kept at exact temperatures for weeks or even months. These warehouses became the beating hearts of urban food distribution in cities like Chicago, New York, and San Francisco. Sprawling complexes of refrigerated storage rose up, their compressors humming day and night, their insulated walls several feet thick. Workers moved through frigid chambers where their breath formed clouds, loading and unloading crates of butter, sides of beef, and crates of eggs. The temperature in each room was calibrated to its content, some hovering just above freezing for fresh produce, others dropping well below zero for frozen goods. But warehouses alone couldn't solve the problem. Food still needed to travel. The refrigerated railway cars that had transformed meat shipping in the late 1800s were improved and standardized. By the 1930s, entire trains of refrigerated cars crisscrossed the continent, their ice bunkers giving way to mechanical cooling units that maintained steady temperatures regardless of the weather outside. A head of lettuce picked in California's Salinas Valley could ride in controlled coolness all the way to a market in Boston. The roads, too, saw a revolution. Refrigerated trucks, or reefer trucks as they came to be known, evolved from simple insulated boxes to sophisticated mobile cooling units. Early versions used ice, just like the railway cars, but this proved impractical for the shorter, more frequent trips trucks made. By the 1940s, mechanical refrigeration units designed specifically for trucks began to appear. These compact systems, mounted on the truck itself or built into the trailer, could maintain freezing temperatures even under the scorching sun of a desert highway. The drivers of these trucks became the unsung heroes of the cold chain, responsible for precious cargo that could spoil if temperatures rose too high, even for a few hours. They monitored gauges, adjusted settings, and kept careful logs of temperatures throughout their journeys. A truck carrying ice cream from a creamery to stores across a state needed to keep its cargo at -10 degrees Fahrenheit. A delivery of fresh fish required near freezing temperatures, but not frozen. Each cargo demanded attention and care. As this infrastructure of cooled warehouses and trucks spread across nations, grocery stores themselves began to change. In the early decades of the 20th century, most food shops kept perishables in simple ice boxes or small, cooled rooms in the back. Customers asked clerks to retrieve items, which were then wrapped and handed over the counter. But as refrigeration technology improved and costs fell, a new vision emerged. What if customers could see and select their own refrigerated items? The answer was the refrigerated display case, an innovation that seems simple now, but required solving complex engineering challenges. These cases needed to keep food cold while remaining open for customers to reach in. all while being energy efficient enough to run all day, every day. The earliest versions, appearing in the 1920s, were essentially glass-fronted boxes with cooling coils, often plagued by frost buildup and uneven temperatures. But engineers persisted, improving airflow patterns, developing better insulation, and creating defrost systems that prevented ice from obscuring the products inside. By mid-century, the modern supermarket emerged, with its long rows of gleaming refrigerated cases filled with milk, cheese, butter, and eggs, and its freezer cabinet stocked with an ever-growing variety of frozen foods. Shoppers could now browse through products at their leisure, examining packages and comparing options, all while the constant hum of compressors kept everything at the perfect temperature. The open displays created a sense of abundance and choice that transformed the shopping experience into something closer to what we know today. This entire system, this cold chain, became invisible to most people even as it revolutionized daily life. A parent picking up milk no longer needed to consider whether it would spoil before reaching home. A restaurant chef could plan menus knowing fresh ingredients would arrive in peak condition. Hospitals could stock blood and medicines requiring refrigeration with confidence that the cold chain would never break. The impact on public health proved profound. Foodborne illnesses, once common and often dangerous, declined dramatically in places where the cold chain reached. Bacteria that cause sickness simply couldn't multiply in properly refrigerated food. Nutrients that degraded at room temperature remained intact when kept cold. Milk that once soured within a day could now stay fresh for a week or more. The cold chain also changed geography itself, or at least how humans related to it. Cities could grow larger because food could travel farther while remaining fresh. Regions could specialize in what they grew best, knowing their products could reach distant markets. Coastal fishermen could sell their catch to landlocked cities hundreds of miles away. Orchards in temperate zones could supply fruit to tropical regions during their off-seasons. Yet for all its complexity and scale, the cold chain worked because of something beautifully simple: the continuous application of the same principle that ancient Persians had used in their yakchuls, that Chinese emperors had understood in their ice houses, and that Frederick Tudor had built his fortune upon. Keep things cold, consistently and reliably, and they last. As the night settles around us, and we consider this remarkable achievement, we might think of all those refrigerated trucks humming along highways in the darkness, the warehouse compressors maintaining their steady vigil, the supermarket display cases glowing softly in empty stores. The cold chain never sleeps, never stops working silently to bring tomorrow's breakfast to our tables. With the cold chain infrastructure firmly established across America and much of the industrialized world, a new possibility emerged that would further transform how people ate and lived. The ability to freeze food quickly and preserve it for months opened doors that previous generations could scarcely have imagined. While people had long understood that frozen food could keep indefinitely, the problem had always been one of quality. Food that froze slowly developed large ice crystals that ruptured cell walls, turning vegetables mushy and meat unappetizing when thawed. The breakthrough would come from an unlikely place, and from a man whose keen observation during a trip to the frozen north would change kitchens around the world. Clarence Birdseye was born in Brooklyn in 1886, a curious young man with an insatiable appetite for understanding the natural world. After studying biology at Amherst College, he ventured to Labrador in Canada as a fur trader between 1912 and 1915. There, in that harsh Arctic environment, he observed something that captured his scientific imagination. The Inuit people caught fish through holes in the ice, and these fish froze almost instantly in the brutally cold Arctic wind, sometimes at temperatures reaching to 40 degrees below zero. When these fish were later thawed and cooked, Birdseye noticed something remarkable. Unlike fish that froze slowly in conventional storage, these rapidly frozen fish tasted fresh, their texture intact and their flavor preserved as if they had just been caught. Birdseye's curious mind couldn't let this observation rest. He understood that the secret lay in the speed of freezing. When food froze rapidly at extremely low temperatures, only tiny ice crystals formed, too small to damage the cellular structure of the food. This meant that upon thawing, the food retained its original texture, appearance, and taste. He began to wonder if this natural phenomenon could be replicated artificially, bringing the benefits of Arctic preservation to households everywhere. Returning from Labrador with his family, Birdseye settled in New Jersey and began experimenting with fast freezing methods. Working with limited resources, he used ice, salt, and an electric fan to create his first freezing apparatus in his kitchen. He tried freezing fish, meat, and vegetables, carefully observing the results. The early experiments showed promise, but achieving truly rapid freezing on a commercial scale would require more sophisticated equipment and significant investment. By 1924, Birdseye had developed his first practical quick freezing process. His method involved placing food packages between two refrigerated metal plates under pressure. The pressure ensured excellent contact between the food and the freezing surface, while the extremely cold plates drew heat away rapidly. He founded the General Seafood Corporation and began freezing fish fillets and other seafood using this technique. The quality of the frozen product was unlike anything available before, but convincing consumers and retailers to embrace frozen food would prove to be its own challenge. The American public in the 1920s had little experience with frozen food beyond ice cream. Most people remained skeptical that frozen vegetables or meat could match the quality of fresh produce. Grocery stores lacked the freezer cases necessary to display and store frozen products. Home refrigerators of the era had small freezer compartments, if they had freezers at all, and these were barely cold enough to keep ice cream solid, let alone maintain the 0-degree temperatures needed for long-term frozen food storage. The entire infrastructure for a frozen food industry simply didn't exist yet. Birdseye persevered, improving his equipment and processes. In 1929, the Postum Company, which would later become General Foods, recognized the potential of Birdseye's innovation and purchased his company for $22 million, a staggering sum during that era. They retained Birdseye as a consultant and launched the Birdseye brand, a play on his surname that would become synonymous with frozen food. The company began with a line of 27 products, including frozen fish, meat, oysters, and various vegetables. The first public test of Birdseye frozen foods took place in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1930. 10 grocery stores in that city received special freezer cases, and consumers were invited to try this new category of food. The quality impressed those who tried it, but sales grew slowly. The Great Depression had begun, and families were cautious about spending money on unfamiliar products. Additionally, the infrastructure challenges persisted. Frozen foods required an unbroken cold chain from factory to table, and any break in that chain meant spoilage and disappointed customers. World War II brought unexpected momentum to the frozen food industry. With fresh produce often scarce due to transportation challenges and the demands of feeding troops overseas, frozen foods offered a practical alternative. The military became a significant customer, shipping frozen foods to bases and troops around the world. American families on the home front, many with women working in factories, while men served overseas, appreciated the convenience of frozen vegetables and other products that required minimal preparation time. After the war ended, the frozen food industry expanded rapidly. Returning veterans started families, moved to suburban homes, and embraced modern conveniences. Refrigerator manufacturers began producing models with larger, colder freezer compartments, specifically designed for storing frozen foods. Grocery stores installed more freezer cases, and the variety of available frozen products multiplied. Beyond vegetables and fish, companies introduced frozen fruit, frozen juice concentrate, frozen baked goods, and eventually, complete frozen meals. The television dinner, introduced by Swanson in 1953, represented perhaps the ultimate expression of frozen food convenience. These aluminum trays contained a complete meal, meat, vegetables, and starch, all frozen together and ready to heat in the oven. The name itself reflected the changing American lifestyle, as families increasingly ate dinner while watching their television sets. Within a year, Swanson sold over 25 million of these dinners, demonstrating enormous appetite for convenient meal solutions. Birdseye himself continued inventing throughout his life, eventually holding over 300 patents in fields ranging from food preservation to light bulbs to harpoon guns. He never stopped exploring and questioning the world around him. His particular genius lay not in inventing freezing, which humans had used for millennia, but in observing carefully, asking why the Inuit method worked so well, and then engineering a way to replicate nature's quick freeze in a factory setting. The frozen food industry grew into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, fundamentally changing agriculture, food processing, and home cooking. Farmers could harvest crops at peak ripeness, freeze them immediately, and preserve that freshness for months. Families could enjoy strawberries in winter and squash in summer. Food waste decreased because frozen food didn't spoil quickly, like fresh produce. Parents could prepare meals more quickly, and the variety of foods available in any season expanded dramatically. As the infrastructure matured and technology improved, freezing temperatures dropped even lower, and freezing times became faster still. Modern flash freezing techniques can freeze food in minutes or even seconds, creating ice crystals so microscopically small they cause virtually no damage to cell structure. The science that Clarence Birdseye pioneered on those frozen shores of Labrador had grown into a sophisticated industry that touched nearly every kitchen in the developed world. The success of frozen foods demonstrated how refrigeration technology could do more than simply preserve. It could transform. It could turn seasonal luxuries into everyday staples, could reduce the labor of meal preparation, and could give families access to nutrition and variety that previous generations had never known. And while Birdseye's quick freezing process was the crucial innovation, it succeeded only because the broader refrigeration infrastructure, the cold warehouses, the refrigerated trucks, the home freezers, had already been built. Each piece of the cold chain enabled the next innovation, and frozen foods represented another link in that chain, connecting farms to families with preserved freshness that would have seemed like magic to people just a few generations earlier. The frozen food industry had transformed how families ate and shopped, but the same cooling technology that preserved vegetables and fish was about to reshape something even more fundamental: the very air people breathed indoors. As the 20th century progressed, refrigeration would evolve beyond preserving food to controlling the climate itself, creating comfortable environments in places where heat and humidity had once made life nearly unbearable. The story of air conditioning begins with a young engineer named Willis Carrier standing in a printing plant in Brooklyn, New York, in the summer of 1902. The Sackett-Wilhelms Lithographing and Publishing Company faced a frustrating problem. The humid summer air caused their paper to expand and contract unpredictably, making it impossible to align colors properly in their 4-color printing process. Each time they tried to print another layer of color, the paper had changed dimensions ever so slightly, ruining the final product. They needed someone who could control not just temperature, but humidity itself. Carrier approached the problem with the principles of refrigeration he had learned as a young Cornell graduate. He designed a system that passed air over coils filled with cold water, which cooled the air and caused moisture to condense out of it, much like dew forming on cold grass on a summer morning. By controlling the temperature of the water flowing through the coils, he could precisely regulate both the temperature and the moisture content of the air in the printing plant. On a rainy night shortly after, as he waited for a train on a foggy platform, the solution had crystallized in his mind. He could treat air like a substance to be manufactured, with specific temperature and humidity levels dialed in like ingredients in a recipe. The printing plant installation worked beautifully, and Carrier had unknowingly invented modern air conditioning. But for many years, the technology found its primary applications not in making people comfortable, but in making industrial processes more reliable. Textile mills discovered that controlled humidity prevented threads from breaking. Pharmaceutical manufacturers found that steady temperatures improved their products. Flour mills and bakeries, movie film producers, and tobacco processors all began installing Carrier's systems to solve production problems. The transition from industrial tool to public comfort came gradually, almost by accident. In 1906, the owner of a textile mill in North Carolina mentioned to a visitor that his air-cooled factory had become a popular place for workers on hot days, with people requesting transfers from other facilities just to work in the cool comfort. Movie theaters discovered the appeal even more dramatically. On sweltering summer days in the 1920s, when traditional theaters sat nearly empty because audiences couldn't bear to sit in hot, stuffy rooms, a few pioneering theatre owners installed air conditioning systems. They advertised the cool air as prominently as the films themselves, with marquees proclaiming 20 degrees cooler inside, or it's cool inside. The Rivoli Theatre in New York, cooled for Memorial Day weekend in 1925, found itself packed with customers who came as much for relief from the heat as for entertainment. Some theatres even screened mediocre films during heat waves, knowing that people would pay admission simply to sit in the cool darkness for a few hours. Summer, traditionally the slowest season for movie houses, became profitable. The experience of sitting comfortably in a space while summer heat blazed outside created a new expectation in the public mind. Climate could be controlled. Department stores followed quickly. Shoppers who might have rushed through their errands on hot days now lingered in the cool aisles, looking at merchandise they might otherwise have ignored. Restaurants, hotels, and office buildings gradually joined the air-conditioned world. The Milam building in San Antonio, completed in 1928, became the first air-conditioned office building, and workers reported feeling more alert and energetic even during the hottest Texas afternoons. But residential air conditioning developed more slowly. Early systems were large, expensive, and required substantial machinery that didn't fit easily into home spaces. The breakthrough came in 1929 when Frigidaire introduced a room air conditioner small enough for home use, though at a price equivalent to a luxury automobile. Few families could afford one. The Great Depression delayed widespread adoption even further. After World War II, everything changed. Manufacturing techniques developed during wartime made air conditioning units smaller and more affordable. Suburban homes spreading across the American South and Southwest increasingly included air conditioning, no longer as a luxury, but as a practical necessity. The window unit air conditioner, affordable enough for middle-class families, became a common sight in homes throughout the 1950s and 1960s. The impact rippled outward in ways few had anticipated. Cities like Phoenix, Las Vegas, Houston, and Miami, which had grown slowly in the era before air conditioning, suddenly experienced explosive growth. Regions where summer heat had limited the hours people could work comfortably now hummed with activity year-round. Architecture changed too. Buildings no longer needed to be designed primarily for natural ventilation. With high ceilings, large windows, and careful orientation to catch breezes, sealed glass towers could rise in any climate, their inhabitants breathing filtered, temperature-controlled air regardless of the weather outside. Automobiles joined the climate-controlled revolution. Packard introduced the first air-conditioned car in 1939, though the system was primitive, with no temperature control and cooling coils that occupied half the trunk. By the 1960s, automotive air conditioning had become refined enough for widespread adoption, and by the end of the century, most new vehicles included it as standard equipment. Long road trips across hot regions became pleasant, rather than enduring tests of heat tolerance. The same refrigeration cycle that kept milk fresh and ice cream frozen had been adapted to cool entire buildings, vehicles, and eventually entire indoor environments where people lived out substantial portions of their lives. The technology that began with Willis Carrier solving a printing problem had reshaped where and how hundreds of millions of people lived, worked, and traveled. As air conditioning became nearly universal in developed countries, engineers continued refining the technology, making systems more efficient and more precise in their climate control. The future held questions about energy consumption and environmental impact, challenges that would drive the next generation of cooling innovations. But those developments belong to the modern era and the continuing evolution of refrigeration technology. As the dawn of the 21st century arrived, refrigeration had become so fundamental to daily life that most people gave it no more thought than they gave to gravity. Yet beneath the familiar hum of household refrigerators and the quiet rush of air conditioning systems, engineers and scientists continued their patient work, reimagining what cooling technology could become. The modern refrigerator, standing in kitchens around the world, represented more than a century of refinement. These appliances had grown remarkably efficient compared to their ancestors. Where early electric refrigerators consumed vast amounts of energy and required frequent maintenance, contemporary models use sophisticated insulation materials, precision-engineered compressors, and intelligent temperature management systems that could keep food fresh while using a fraction of the electricity. Engineers had learned to optimize every component, from the shape of the cooling coils to the seal around the door, creating machines that performed their essential task with quiet reliability. As environmental awareness spread across the globe, the refrigeration industry faced its most significant challenge since the transition away from ice harvesting. The synthetic refrigerants that had seemed so promising in the mid-20th century, particularly the chlorofluorocarbons known as CFCs, had revealed an unexpected consequence. Scientists discovered these substances were drifting into the upper atmosphere and damaging the ozone layer that protected Earth from harmful radiation. The Montreal Protocol of 1987 brought nations together to phase out these harmful chemicals, setting the stage for yet another transformation in cooling technology. The search for environmentally responsible refrigerants became a global priority. Researchers developed hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, which protected the ozone layer, but still contributed to climate warming. This led to continued innovation, with newer refrigerants like hydrofluoroolefins offering better environmental profiles. Some manufacturers explored returning to natural refrigerants like carbon dioxide and hydrocarbons, substances that the earliest refrigeration pioneers had experimented with over a century before, now made safe through modern engineering and safety systems. Energy efficiency emerged as another frontier for improvement. Governments around the world implemented standards requiring refrigerators and air conditioners to meet minimum efficiency requirements. These regulations spurred innovation in compressor design, heat exchanger technology, and insulation materials. Variable speed compressors that adjusted their operation based on cooling demand replaced the simple on-off cycling of older models. Advanced insulation using vacuum panels and aerogels reduced the transfer of heat through refrigerator walls to nearly negligible levels. The digital revolution quietly transformed refrigeration from purely mechanical devices into intelligent systems. Sensors began monitoring temperature, humidity, and even the freshness of food inside refrigerators. Microprocessors optimized cooling cycles, managed defrost operations, and diagnosed potential problems before they led to failures. Some refrigerators connected to the internet, allowing them to alert owners about maintenance needs, suggest recipes based on their content, or adjust their operation based on electricity prices throughout the day. In research laboratories, scientists explored cooling technologies that abandoned traditional vapor compression entirely. Magnetic refrigeration used the magneto-caloric effect, where certain materials heated up when exposed to magnetic fields and cooled when the field was removed. By cycling these materials through magnetic fields and allowing heat exchange, researchers created cooling systems with no moving compressors and no chemical refrigerants at all. Though still in experimental stages for most applications, these systems promised even greater efficiency and environmental friendliness. Thermoelectric cooling, based on the Peltier effect discovered in the 19th century, found specialized applications where solid-state cooling without moving parts proved valuable. Small refrigerators in hotel rooms, portable coolers, and precision temperature control for electronics utilized these quiet, vibration-free systems. While less efficient than compression-based cooling for large applications, thermoelectric devices offered advantages in specific situations where their unique characteristics mattered most. The cold chain that had revolutionized food distribution continued evolving with new technologies. Temperature monitoring systems tracked refrigerated products from farm to table, creating detailed records that ensured food safety throughout complex distribution networks. Sophisticated warehouse management systems optimized the storage of frozen and chilled goods, while improved refrigerated transport allowed fresh food to travel farther than ever before. In developing regions, solar-powered refrigeration systems brought food preservation to areas without reliable electrical grids, reducing waste and improving nutrition. Commercial refrigeration advanced alongside residential systems. Supermarket display cases became more efficient through advanced door designs, LED lighting that produced minimal heat, and sophisticated airflow systems that maintained proper temperatures while reducing energy consumption. Some stores experimented with carbon dioxide-based refrigeration systems that served entire facilities from centralized equipment, improving efficiency and reducing refrigerant quantities. Air conditioning technology, the offspring of refrigeration science, continued its own evolution. Heat pump systems that could both cool and heat buildings became increasingly common, offering year-round climate control with impressive efficiency. In regions with extreme heat, evaporative cooling technologies that required no refrigerants at all provided comfort using principles humans had employed for millennia, now refined through modern engineering. Looking toward the future, researchers explored cooling technologies that seemed like science fiction. Radiative cooling systems that released heat directly into the coldness of space through carefully designed surfaces promised cooling without energy input during nighttime hours. Materials that changed their properties based on temperature could automatically regulate heat flow, creating passively intelligent building envelopes. Researchers even investigated cooling systems based on quantum mechanical effects, operating at scales and through mechanisms unimaginable to earlier generations. The story of refrigeration had traveled an extraordinary distance from ancient ice houses to smart appliances, from muscle-powered ice harvesting to magnetic cooling systems, from local food preservation to global cold chains. Yet the fundamental human need remained unchanged. The desire to keep food fresh, to create comfort in challenging climates, and to preserve the things that sustained life and health. As engineers continued refining refrigeration technology, making it more efficient, more environmentally responsible, and more capable, they carried forward a tradition of innovation stretching back thousands of years. Every improvement built upon knowledge accumulated by countless individuals who had studied heat and cold, who had experimented with mechanisms and materials, who had transformed observations into understanding. and understanding into practical tools. The refrigerator humming quietly in the kitchen, the air conditioner maintaining comfortable temperatures, the refrigerated truck delivering fresh produce, all represented humanity's long conversation with the challenge of controlling temperature. From the first person who noticed food kept better in a cold cave to the scientists developing tomorrow's cooling technologies, each generation added its contribution to this essential capability. And as new challenges emerged and new possibilities appeared, the story of refrigeration continued unfolding, a testament to human curiosity, ingenuity, and the patient accumulation of knowledge across the ages. As we bring to a close our journey through the fascinating story of refrigeration, from ancient ice houses to the modern marvels that preserve our food today, we hope these tales of human ingenuity have gently carried you through the evening. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful exploration of how we learn to keep things cool and transform our daily lives. If these calm adventures have brought you comfort, we'd love to have you with us again. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below to help other smart sleepers find their way here. And now, as the night deepens and your mind settles, we wish you the sweetest of dreams. Good night, fellow dreamer, and may your sleep be restful and your dreams be kind.